So anyway, Adventure Time. There's something about that show I've never quite been able to shake, even years after it wrapped up, and I think it's mostly to do with the way it just casually drops the most devastating bits of world building in between the bacon pancakes and the talking sword fights. It's a show that opens with a kid pulling magical weapons out of trees and ends up explaining the cosmic origins of evil. And somehow nobody at the network seems to have noticed in time to stop them. That's the bit that keeps pulling me back. If you've ended up here, you probably already know what I mean. You've seen the show, or you grew up on it, or maybe you've just always heard people talk about it like it changed something for them. Either way, hello. This one's going to be a long, slow ramble through the lore of the Land of Ooo, and the only real plan is that there isn't much of a plan. Just me talking through the strange, beautiful, slightly sad history of a cartoon that was almost certainly smarter than it had any right to be. A small note before we get into it. This is a sleep video, so I'm not going to be trying to keep you awake. There won't be any sudden volume jumps, or dramatic cliffhangers, or that bit where the narrator goes, but what happened next will absolutely shock you. Because honestly, if you're settling in to drift off, that's the last thing you want. If you fall asleep 5 minutes in, brilliant. If you fall asleep 10 minutes in, also brilliant. If you stay up for the whole thing, well, hopefully it's at least the kind of thing that's nice to have on. No pressure, either way. The other thing I'll say up front is that I'm not going strictly in order. Adventure Time's timeline is 1,000+ years long, and a lot of the most interesting stuff lives in the gaps and the side roads, so we're going to wander a bit. I might talk about the present-day kingdoms, then go back 1,000,000 years to a dinosaur in a wizard's tower, then come forward to talk about a robot launching its dying father's memory into space. That's just how the show works, really. The lore folds in on itself. Oh, and if you enjoy this sort of thing and want more long, slow lore rambles, there's a subscribe button somewhere, and you're welcome to use it or not. I genuinely don't care. Either way, I just wanted to mention it once at the start so I don't have to do that horrible end of video cheerful guilt thing where the narrator yells about smashing buttons. Nobody wants that energy at 1 in the morning, right? So, Adventure Time. For ages, when the show first started airing, I thought it was just a daft little adventure cartoon about a boy and a dog, which, to be fair, it kind of was, for the first season or so. Finn would go off to fight a dungeon monster, Jake would stretch his arms into a big hammer, they'd save a princess made of bubblegum, and that'd be your 12 minutes done. There were singing rainbows, there was a princess made of hot dogs, the Ice King would cry about being lonely. It was a charming, weird little show, and I assumed that's all it was ever going to be. Then there's this moment, and I can't even tell you exactly which episode. It was the first time it really hit me, where the camera lingers for just a second too long on something in the background. A rusted out car in a field, a half-buried television, a broken truck with the words, "Wash me," still scratched into the dust on the side. And you go, oh, hang on a minute, that's a Volkswagen. That's a real-world Volkswagen sitting in the grass behind these characters who are made of candy and lava and demon energy. Why is that there? That's the moment where Adventure Time stops being just a kids show and starts being something else. Because if there are old cars in the background, that means there used to be people. And if there used to be people and there aren't anymore, then something must have happened. And once you start noticing it, you can't stop. There's a swing set rusting in one episode. There's a giant abandoned military jet, half buried in a hillside. There's a perfectly normal kitchen appliance sat there in a cave, just quietly being 20th century and decaying. The whole place is a graveyard, and the show just lets it sit in the background while the kids go off to play. That's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Not the surface level adventure plots, although those are obviously brilliant, but the stuff underneath. The deep, slow, deeply melancholy history of how the Land of Ooo came to be. The people who lived through the thing that ended the world. The cosmic horrors floating around outside the atmosphere. The little robot in the tree fort who's older than basically anyone in the cast. The vampire queen who's been carrying around the same teddy bear for 1,000 years. The princess who came out of a vat of sentient pink goo and just decided she was royalty. All of it. I'll try to keep it gentle. No rushing, no big dramatic build-ups, just a long, friendly tour through one of the strangest fictional worlds ever put on television. A quick note on what I'm not going to do, just so we're on the same page. I'm not going to recap every single episode because we'd be here for a week and you'd never sleep again. I'm not going to do tier lists or rank the characters or anything like that because frankly, that's not the vibe. And I'm not going to try and prove some big unified theory of the show, because honestly, the writers themselves left a lot of it deliberately ambiguous, and trying to nail it all down would just be annoying. Some of the best Adventure Time lore is the stuff that's just sort of implied and never explained. I'll point it out where I see it, and we can both sit with the not knowing. There is one statistic I should probably mention now, because it's going to come up a couple of times. The Mushroom War, which is the apocalyptic event that destroyed the human world and gave us the Land of Ooo, happened roughly 1,000 years before the events of the main show. We know this because there's a flashback episode where Marceline is a little kid and there's a time card on screen that says exactly 996 years ago. That's the closest the show ever gets to giving us a precise timeline, and it's basically 1,000 years. I'll try not to keep repeating it, because once you know it, and a sleep video is the last place anyone needs a recap. Right then. I think that's enough preamble. Let me top up my tea or whatever it is you imagine me drinking, get comfortable, adjust the pillow. If you're already starting to feel that nice heavy eyelid thing happening, you don't need to fight it. That's the whole idea. Let's start at the beginning, or near the beginning, or, well, somewhere near the bit where there's still a recognizable Earth. Because that's where this whole strange story actually begins, and it's the thing that makes everything else in Adventure Time make sense once you know about it. So, once upon a time, there was a planet called Earth, and it had people on it, and the people did something very, very stupid. The Land of Ooo is Earth. That's the whole secret of Adventure Time, and the show never sits you down and explains it. It just lets you work it out for yourself, in your own time, at your own pace. Which is, honestly, one of the cleverest things any kids show has ever done. When you watch the first season, there's no real reason to assume the world Finn and Jake are wandering around in is supposed to be our planet. It's got candy people in it. It's got a princess made of fire and an ice king. The geography looks strange, the colours are too bright, the sky is sometimes pink. If anything, you'd assume it was just a fantasy world, the way most kids' cartoons are, some made-up place with magic and dragons. Adventure Time absolutely lets you make that assumption for ages. And then, just gently, just out of the corner of your eye, it starts dropping clues. The first one I ever properly noticed was a rusted car. There's an episode where Finn and Jake go on a little walk through the forest, and as they're chatting about something completely unrelated, the camera passes a wrecked, weed-strangled car that looks exactly like a real car you'd see in our world. Not a fantasy version, not a cartoony version, an actual, real-world four-door saloon, just sat there rusting, half-eaten by vines. Nobody comments on it. It's not a plot point, it's just there. And then once you've seen one, you can't stop seeing them. The show is absolutely riddled with them. Old telephone poles, sections of railway track, abandoned military helicopters, petrol pumps, vending machines, a jet airliner with its nose buried in a hillside. Even the floor of Finn and Jake's tree fort, if you look closely, has bits of old debris and pre-war wreckage scattered around. The whole place is basically built on top of a graveyard, and the graveyard is us. It's our world. The Land of Ooo is just what's left of Earth, after a very long time of nobody being around to look after it. There's even, in a few episodes, the suggestion that the geography of Ooo lines up with old North America. Marceline at one point mentions her family used to live somewhere on the East Coast. Princess Bubblegum's flashbacks show what looks like a recognizable American skyline somewhere in the deep past. The show never makes a big deal of any of this, but the breadcrumbs are absolutely there if you want them. Now, the thing that ended this old world, the reason Earth turned into Ooo, is something the characters in the show refer to, when they refer to it at all, as the Great Mushroom War. And the name is the kind of thing that sounds very silly until you actually think about it for half a second, at which point it becomes deeply unfunny. A mushroom as a shape is a cap on a stem. A mushroom cloud, as everybody who grew up after about 1945 knows perfectly well, is the cap on a stem shape that a nuclear explosion makes. The Mushroom War is a nuclear war. The show is calling it a mushroom war, because in-universe, that's all the survivors really remembered about it. The bit they saw in the sky just before everything went wrong. The mushroom, that's the part that stuck. I think about this fairly often, actually. The way that humans in the show's history, in the chaos and the confusion and the dying, ended up just naming the war after the shape of the cloud. It's the kind of thing that probably would happen. You wouldn't remember the geopolitics. You wouldn't remember which country fired first, or what the official reasons were. You'd just remember the shape in the sky, and that had become the only word for it that anyone could agree on. The Great Mushroom War. Said in the same casual way, you might say the war, or the Troubles, or back when things went bad. What we know about the war itself is, deliberately, almost nothing. The writers were very careful to leave the actual cause vague. There's a tiny hint in one episode that, in Simon Petrikov's pre-war journals, there was some kind of brewing international conflict between major world powers, but it never gets pinned down to specific countries or specific events. The implication is that whatever it was that started it, the people involved were as petty and confused and short-sighted as you'd expect, and it spiraled into the worst possible outcome the way these things sometimes do. That's all, and then somebody dropped what the show calls the mushroom bomb, which is where it gets a bit more interesting than just a standard apocalypse. Because the mushroom bomb that ended the war wasn't just nuclear, it did something extra. It changed things at a biological level. It mutated much of what was left alive. And it did one other thing, which is the bit that really matters for the rest of the show. It brought back magic. This is something that's hinted at a few times across the series, mostly through Simon and through Princess Bubblegum, that magic used to exist in the deep past, then slowly faded out across most of human history, then got reawakened by the mutagenic bomb. The show treats magic almost like a kind of background radiation. It was always there in the ground, dormant, waiting. The bomb churned it back up, and once it was loose again, you got vampires, and elementals, and demons, and talking penguins, and all the other strangeness that makes Ooo what it is. The apocalypse, in a weird way, gave the world back its old magic, which is a kind of bleak silver lining, but it's there. One small detail I love, that you can catch if you're watching for it, is that in the very opening shot of the Adventure Time intro sequence, before the theme song properly kicks in, you can see 3 mushroom clouds along with arrows and axes and swords laid out on the ground. The show is literally telling you, in the title sequence, what kind of world this is. It's so casual about it. 3 little nuclear cloud icons sitting there alongside a sword, like, oh yes, this is the thing that happened. And now we have magic again. Hope you enjoy the show. The timeline. I mentioned in the opening that the war happened roughly 1,000 years before the main events of the show. The exact figure gets nailed down later by a flashback episode we'll come back to, but 1,000 is close enough for our purposes. The bomb went off, the world ended, magic came roaring back, and then 10 centuries went by while everything settled into the strange new shape we now know as the Land of Ooo. Fans have spent ages trying to work out when in our timeline the war is supposed to have happened. Some of them have done genuinely impressive detective work on this, looking at the kind of cars that show up in the rubble, the brands of cereal in old kitchens, the technology that survived. The general consensus seems to land somewhere between the late 1980s and the early 2010s, depending on which clue you weight most heavily. There's a Tumblr post somewhere where a fan figured out it might be roughly 2007, based partly on a lunar eclipse visible in a background photograph. That's the level of detail the show built into its backgrounds, and the level of obsession the fandom has applied to working it out. I genuinely love that, but the writers themselves have never confirmed a specific year, and I actually think that's the right call. The war is meant to feel like something that happened just close enough to us that the rubble is recognizable, but just far enough away that it could be anyone, anytime. It could have been us, it could have been our grandparents, it could have been our great-grandkids. The point is that it happened, and now there's 1,000 years of strange, beautiful, sad, new world sitting on top of it. The bomb itself, the mushroom bomb, is still around. That's the other little detail that I think is brilliant. In an alternate timeline that the show explores briefly, the bomb gets frozen in mid-air by Simon Petrikov, and you can see it just hanging there above his crushed body, kept icy and dormant for the next 1,000 years. In the main timeline, where Simon couldn't stop it, the bomb went off and made the Lich, who we'll talk about later. But that frozen bomb image, where it just sits in the air, never quite going off, is the show in a single picture. The end of everything, paused. Forever ago, still there. The geography of Ooo itself, by the way, is partly a result of all this. The continent we see in the show is a weirdly chunky, asymmetrical landmass, with a huge missing chunk taken out of one side, and there's a fan theory that's mostly accepted at this point that the missing chunk is what's left of where the bombs hit hardest. The Badlands, which we'll talk about later, are a stretch of barren wasteland in the southern regions of Ooo, and they sit almost exactly where the worst of the radiation would have concentrated. The Ice Kingdom is roughly where Scandinavia or northern Russia would have been. The Candy Kingdom seems to sit somewhere around the old American Midwest. None of this is canon, exactly, but the show is happy to let you draw the lines if you want to. There's also, weirdly, evidence that humans tried to go to space before the war finished destroying everything. In one episode, Jake says, almost as a throwaway, that rocket ships haven't been reinvented yet, which implies they were a thing once and now they aren't, and somewhere along the way, the knowledge of how to build them just got lost. That's such a small line. It's the kind of thing you could miss completely on a first watch, but it tells you something massive about what the world used to be, which is that humans had reached the point of building rockets, and then they undid all of that, and now a dog has to comment on how rocket ships are something people used to have. That's the show in a sentence, really. Big sad things, said Small. A few survivors of the war went up into space, actually, before the worst of it. The show drops a hint of this in a couple of places. We'll come back to that when we talk about the islands and the surviving humans, because it ties into Finn's whole storyline. But the point for now is that some people knew what was coming and tried to get out, and most of them didn't make it, and the ones who stayed mostly didn't make it either. The Mushroom War was, in every meaningful sense, the end of human civilization. What was left behind, slowly, over centuries, became something else. Vampires surged following the aftermath of the Mushroom War. Mutated creatures crawled out of the irradiated zones. The Candy Elemental woke up in a vat of post-war goo. The Ice Crown sat in the snow, waiting for someone to wear it. And one little girl, half human and half demon, wandered through the rubble with an antiquarian who was slowly forgetting his own name. That's where we're going next. But before we leave the war behind entirely, I want to mention one more thing about it, which is the way the show treats it as a kind of soft, ambient grief that just hangs over everything. Nobody in Ooo really talks about it. Nobody mourns it openly. The Candy people don't seem to know about it at all. Bubblegum knows, but she's so old and so practical that she doesn't bring it up unless she has to. Marceline knows, because she was there for the end of it, and you can sometimes hear it in her music. Simon obviously knows, but he can't remember properly, because the crown keeps eating his memories. The war is the unspoken weight that the whole world is sitting on top of, and the cartoon, the bright, happy cartoon for children, just lets it sit there, doesn't explain it, doesn't moralize about it, just lets it be there in the background, in the rusted cars and the buried bombs, and the way certain characters look at the sky a little too long sometimes. I think that's one of the bravest things a kids' show has ever done, honestly. To trust the audience that much, to go, here is a sad thing, you don't have to fully understand it, just know that it's there, and the people you're watching are carrying it. Right, so that's the Mushroom War. The thing that ended the old world and gave us the new one. The reason the Land of Ooo looks the way it looks, and the reason magic came back, and the reason the rusted out cars are sat in the meadows behind Finn and Jake's adventures. Hold on to that, because basically every other thing we're going to talk about tonight is downstream of it, in one way or another. But since we've already drifted into talking about who survived the war, and how they survived it, let's go ahead and talk about probably the most important survivor of the lot. The man who put on a crown for a laugh and ended up living through the apocalypse without ever quite remembering he'd done it. Picture a young man with dark hair and round glasses, sitting at a wooden desk in a flat somewhere, holding an old crown up to the light. He's in love. He's about to be married. He bought the crown for next to nothing from a dock worker in northern Scandinavia, because he's an antiquarian, and old strange things are the entire point of his life. That's Simon Petrikov, before any of the bad stuff happens. I think it's worth starting there, because the show is so very fond of showing us the Ice King first, the silly cartoon villain with the long beard and the blue skin, and the obsession with kidnapping princesses, and only slowly, over years of episodes, letting us realize that he used to be somebody completely different. Somebody you might have liked. Somebody you might have known. Simon's job, the word for his job, is antiquarian. That word always slows me down a little when I hear it. It sounds like a job from another century. It basically means he was a collector and a scholar of antiquities, of old objects with history baked into them, Books, artifacts, jewelry, the occasional cursed amulet. He took them seriously. He loved them. There's a kind of person who genuinely lights up when they see something old, who feels a small reverence for objects that have outlived their original owners, and Simon was that kind of person. Before all of this happened to him, that was who he was. A gentle man, quietly besotted with the past. His fiancée was a woman named Betty Groff, who, by all the small flashes we get of her in pre-war times, was every bit his equal. She was a researcher in her own right, smart and curious and warm with him. He used to call her Princess, just as a little pet name. The show doesn't dwell on their relationship before the crown arrives in his life, but the bits we do see make it clear they were genuinely happy. They had plans. They had a life that was going to keep going. And then there's the crown. The story of the crown, as we hear it told in Simon's own video diaries much later, is almost annoyingly mundane. He was browsing the antique stalls in northern Scandinavia, doing his usual scholarly buying, and an old dock worker had a strange-looking gold crown for sale. It was cheap. Simon thought it was unusual, maybe valuable, definitely interesting. So he bought it. He brought it home in his bag. He showed Betty. He put it on his head, just as a joke, just to make her laugh. Whatever happened next, the show does show us through Simon's backstory episodes and referenced scenes. We see the final scene between them, which shows Betty sacrificing herself to protect Simon before merging with Golb, running in some versions of the story. Simon on the floor with the crown beside him, not remembering what he'd done or said, but knowing it must have been terrible, because she's gone. I think that's actually one of the saddest narrative choices in the whole show. To not show us what he did, to make us imagine it. Because whatever your brain fills in, it'll be the worst thing for that specific relationship, and it'll feel personal. The show trusts you to do the work, and the work hurts. After that, Simon's life starts coming apart in slow motion. Betty doesn't come back. The crown sits there on a shelf, and he keeps putting it on because it talks to him, or rather because something whispers to him through it. The crown, you see, isn't just a piece of cursed jewelry. It's an ancient magical object with a kind of will of its own, and we'll get into where it actually came from much later when we talk about the elementals. For now, just know that the thing has been waiting for somebody for an extremely long time, and Simon was the somebody who finally picked it up. The whispers told him about snow, about cold, about a power he didn't understand. They told him the snow would save him, which sounded mad at the time, because he was just a normal man in a normal city, with no particular reason to think the world was about to end. He didn't yet know that there was a war coming. He didn't yet know that he, alone of nearly everyone he loved, was about to live through the worst thing that ever happened to humanity. The crown knew. The crown was preparing him, in its own strange, ruinous way. He started keeping video diaries. There's a whole episode, Holly Jolly Secrets, where Finn and Jake find them, and we get to watch Simon's slow disintegration in his own words. He records himself on what looks like a handheld camera, propped up in his flat, and across the entries you can watch him changing. His hair starting to lose its colour, his skin going a shade or two paler, his glasses sliding down a thinner, sharper nose, his voice getting wobblier. By the last of the diaries, he's nearly the Ice King we know from the show's present, but he's still trying to be Simon, still trying to remember, still talking to a camera as if Betty might one day find it and watch. Honestly, those video diaries are some of the most genuinely upsetting minutes of television I've ever sat through, and I sometimes forget they're from a kid's cartoon. The framing is so casual, the animation so simple, and the content is a man documenting himself losing his entire self, while pretending, for the camera, that he might still be alright. The other thing the show does, very cleverly, is hint at the war coming without ever spelling it out. In one of the diary entries, you can see, through the window behind Simon, what looks like a military plane in the sky. The world outside his flat is starting to go bad. He's so focused on the crown and on Betty that he barely notices. By the time the actual bomb falls, Simon is already most of the way gone, and the crown has not effectively saved him in the way it promised. He's cold enough, magical enough, mutated enough by the crown's influence that the apocalypse can't quite kill him. That's the brutal irony at the heart of his story. The crown was right. It really did save his life. It just made him give up everything that made his life worth living in order to do it. Betty, his memories, his sense of self, his sanity, his face. All of that traded, slowly and without his consent, for the privilege of being alive on a planet that no longer had anyone left to be alive with. When we eventually meet him as the Ice King, in the main timeline of the show, he's a cartoon villain. A funny, slightly pathetic, slightly menacing old man with a long white beard, blue skin, a pointy nose, an obsession with kidnapping princesses for reasons he can't quite articulate, and a habit of yelling for his pet penguin Gunter. He's silly. He's the kind of bad guy a kid's show needs, the kind you can have Finn punch in the face and not feel bad about. For the entire first season or two, that's all he is, on the surface, a joke villain. And the show very, very carefully does not tell you about Simon yet. It lets you laugh at the Ice King for a long time before it starts pulling back the curtain. By the time you find out the whole truth, that this silly cartoon villain used to be a kind, well-spoken antiquarian who tried not to lose himself, you can't really laugh at him anymore. Or if you do, the laughs come with a bit of a sting in them, which is, again, exactly what the writers wanted. There's one small detail about Ice King I always come back to, which is the names. He calls his penguin Gunter. He also calls a lot of other penguins Gunter. In fact, he seems to have a vague compulsion to call almost everything Gunter, at least once in a while. Even Marceline, in a flashback, gets called Gunter by him, just briefly before he catches himself. It seems like a joke at first. It's funny watching this old man fail to remember names. But once you find out about the original Gunther, which is a story we'll get to when we talk about the elementals, that little quirk becomes something else entirely. The Crown isn't just changing Simon's appearance, it's running an old program in his head, looping a name from millions of years ago, like a corrupted file that won't stop playing. Simon, for me, is the saddest character in Adventure Time. Full stop. There are sadder individual moments in the show, certainly. There are bigger heartbreaks. But Simon's story is the one that runs underneath everything else, quietly, for the entire 10-season run. Every time the Ice King does something silly, you remember he didn't ask for any of this. Every time he kidnaps a princess for a wedding, you remember he's trying to recreate something he can't quite reach in his own brain anymore. Every time Marceline visits him and he doesn't recognize her, you remember she's the closest thing he has to family, and he doesn't know. I want to mention one more thing about pre-Mushroom War Simon, which is that he wasn't just an antiquarian by profession. He was, by all the implications we get, somebody who took the ethics of his work fairly seriously. There's a brief sequence in the show where we see him in what looks like a small museum, lecturing about responsibility and provenance, the kind of person who genuinely cared about where artifacts came from and who they used to belong to, which makes the Crown even more painful in a way. It got him because he was exactly the kind of person who would notice it. Anyone less interested in old objects, anyone less curious, anyone less reverent about the past, would probably have ignored the thing entirely. The Crown found Simon precisely because Simon was the kind of person who would care about a crown. There's a moment much later in the show, in an episode called Betty, where Simon briefly gets to be Simon again. Properly. The Crown's magic is permanently lost, and Simon collapses and begins aging rapidly, as the Crown was the only thing keeping him alive. He's standing there blinking, holding his old glasses, trying to remember what year it is. And the first thing he asks about isn't himself. He doesn't ask what's happened to him, or where he is, or what the world looks like now. He asks about Betty. He asks where she is. He needs to know if she's all right. After everything the Crown has done to him, the first instinct that comes back is to make sure his fiancée is safe. That, for me, is the cleanest portrait of who Simon really was. A man whose first thought, after 1,000 years of madness, is somebody else's well-being. We'll talk more about Simon as we go, because he keeps showing up in this story. He's tied to Marceline. He's tied to Betty's eventual fate. He's tied to the Fiona and Cake spin-off in a major way. He even, in the Adventure Time spin-off Fiona and Cake, gets his Simonness back permanently, which is one of the kindest things Adventure Time ever did for a character. But for now, just sit with the image. A young man with glasses and dark hair, holding a strange crown up to the light in his flat. His fiancée watching from across the room. He's about to lose everything. He doesn't know yet. The Crown is whispering. The bomb is years away, or months away, or weeks. The world is about to end, and he is, somehow, about to be one of the only survivors. But surviving alone is its own kind of curse, and one of the things the show does beautifully, is give Simon a small bit of light in the worst possible setting. Because in the rubble of the apocalypse, after most everyone he knew was dead, Simon found a little girl. And he found her. And he looked after her for as long as he could. That little girl was Marceline, and what happened between them, across the slow grey years after the bomb, is one of the gentlest stories the show ever tells. So we'll go there next. There's an episode of Adventure Time called Simon and Marty. Just those two names, sat there in the title card, nothing else. And if you ask people who watch the show what their favourite episode is, there's a pretty good chance that this is the one they'll mention. I think it's the best single episode of television the show ever made, honestly, although I know people will disagree with me about that, and that's fine. The setup is simple enough. It's a flashback. The time card on screen says 996 years ago. Marceline, who in the present day is a 1,000-year-old vampire with rock star energy and a complicated relationship with her own past, is 7 years old in this episode. Just a small, ordinary, frightened 1,000-year-old. And the man looking after her, the one walking through the bombed-out husk of a city with her on his back, is Simon. Not the Ice King yet, but on the way. Still wearing his old coat, still mostly himself. The crown rested upon his head, glowing faintly, the temptation always there. They're looking for chicken soup. That's the actual stated quest of the episode. Marceline isn't feeling well, and Simon, who is doing his absolute best to be a good guardian to this child in the middle of the literal apocalypse, has decided she needs chicken soup. So they go into the ruins of what used to be a city, picking through abandoned shops, looking for tins of soup that might still be edible after the war. And along the way, they sing. They sing this little song called Where Everybody Knows Your Name, which was originally the Cheers theme from the old American sitcom, but Simon hums and sings it to her like a lullaby, like a small piece of the old world he still remembers, and she joins in. I cannot tell you how much that scene does to me. A grown man, half mad, in the middle of a dead city, carrying a sick little girl on his back, singing the theme song from a television comedy he used to watch. Trying to keep her calm, trying to keep her cheered up, knowing, somewhere in the bit of his brain that isn't yet eaten by the crown, that he's losing himself and might not be around much longer to protect her. The crown's role in all of this is one of the quietly devastating things about the episode. Simon is genuinely trying not to put it on. He knows that wearing it makes him stronger, makes him cold, makes him able to fight off the mutants and oozers that are roaming the wasteland looking for food. But he also knows that every time he wears it, he loses a little more of himself. So he's trying to ration it, trying to only use it when he absolutely has to. The episode is structured around the various points where things get bad enough that he has to put the crown on and then take it off again afterward. And you can see each time that he comes back a little less himself than he was before. At one point in the episode, they get cornered by a bunch of these ooze creatures, big mutant goop monsters that I think used to be people, and Simon has to wear the crown for long enough to fight them off. He freezes them, he sends them flying, he's saying things that aren't really Simon, just for those few minutes. And then when the danger's passed and he takes the crown off, he comes back to himself, and Marceline looks at him, and he looks at her, and you can see in his face that he knows what's happening. He knows he's running out of time as Simon. He knows there'll be a moment, maybe soon, where he doesn't come back from putting the crown on, and he's trying so hard to delay that moment for as long as he possibly can, because there's a kid who needs him. The doll comes into this story too, the one I'm sure I'll keep mentioning, because it ends up being the single most important object in Marceline's entire long life. Hambo. It's a little stitched-up toy, a kind of bear-like thing with button eyes and a slightly squashed face. Simon makes it for her, or finds it for her, or possibly some combination of the two, depending on which flashback you're looking at. The show isn't always consistent about exactly when she gets Hambo, but it's during these post-war years, and it's from Simon, and that's what matters. For Marceline, Hambo becomes the only piece of her childhood that she gets to keep. Her mum, Elise, is already dead by this point in the timeline. We'll come back to that properly later, but the short version is, Marceline lost her mother in the war, or shortly after, the implication being radiation sickness. And from then on, it's basically just her and Simon, the two of them wandering. Hambo is the thing she clings to. Hambo is small enough to carry. Hambo doesn't change. Hambo doesn't forget who he is or who she is. Hambo is permanence, in a world where nothing else is. 1,000 years later, in the main timeline of the show, Marceline still has Hambo, same doll, same button eyes. Slightly more worn from the centuries, but it's the same doll Simon gave her in a dead city when she was 7. There's an entire episode that revolves around her trying to get Hambo back after it's lost or stolen, and the lengths she goes to, the trade she eventually makes, are not the kind of thing you'd do for a normal toy. You'd only do it for the last piece of the only good thing left from a childhood that was otherwise mostly bad, which is what Hambo is. There's an episode called I Remember You that came before Simon and Marcy chronologically, in the show's airing order, but which sits in this same emotional space. In I Remember You, in the present day of the show, the Ice King turns up at Marceline's house wanting to write a song together, just on a whim. He's brought some old papers, old notebooks, things he's been carrying around for ages without really understanding what they are. And as Marceline starts going through them, she realizes they're Simon's. They're from before. There are photographs of the two of them when she was small. There's a letter Simon wrote to her. The letter is the bit that gets me. Simon wrote a letter to Marceline before he fully became the Ice King, explaining that he was about to disappear into the crown for good. That he knew he was losing himself, that he was sorry, that whatever wrong he might do, once he was no longer himself, he hoped she could forgive him. He was apologizing in advance for the things the crown was going to make him do, and for the fact that he wasn't going to remember her, and for the fact that he was leaving her alone even though he didn't want to. He wrote that letter to her, and then he forgot her. Forgot the letter, forgot himself. In I Remember You, the Ice King sings the letter aloud but does not recognize his own words, doesn't understand who it's addressed to. Marceline is sitting next to him, listening to her surrogate father read his own apology to her, without knowing it's his own apology, and she's the only one in the room who knows what's happening. She tries to jog his memory, gently, with a song. She plays him bits of the songs they used to sing. He almost gets there. He almost remembers her, for half a second, before it slips away again. And then he's just the Ice King again, daft and slightly cheerful, asking if they should jam. That episode, I Remember You, was directed and storyboarded with the kind of restraint that you almost never see in animation. There's no dramatic music, there's a major iconic speech, there's just this slow, devastating song the two of them sing together, with Simon's lines coming from the Ice King's memory in fragments, and Marceline filling in the bits he can't reach. By the end of it, you're sat there, possibly with a cup of tea going cold in your hand, just quietly processing the fact that a kid's cartoon has put a piece of music into your head that's about dementia, basically. About the way somebody can be in the room with you and still be gone. Coming back to Simon and Marcy, the episode itself. The chicken soup quest ends roughly the way you'd expect, in that Simon does eventually find Marceline some soup, although by then she's nearly alright anyway, because 7-year-olds are surprisingly resilient. The episode wraps up with the two of them sitting somewhere quiet, eating, and Simon making the decision that he's going to leave her, that he's becoming too dangerous to be around her, that the next time he puts the crown on, he might not be able to come back, and if that happens with her nearby, he could hurt her without even knowing he was doing it. So he tells her, gently, that he's going to go off on his own. We do actually see them part. The episode ends before that. But we know it happens, because by the time the main show starts, Marceline is on her own, and Simon is the Ice King, and they continue to see each other, with him not recognizing her. The decision Simon made to leave her in order to protect her is one of those quiet acts of love that I don't think gets enough credit. It's not flashy, it's not heroic in the way kids' cartoons usually frame heroism. He just made the kind, terrible call that he had to make, and then he disappeared into the crown, and she had to go on growing up alone. A small detail that I think is worth mentioning. In the episode, there's a moment where Simon, in one of his more lucid stretches, asks Marceline what she'd do if he ever stopped recognizing her. And she thinks about it, and she says, in the way only a small child can, that she'd remind him every day of who he was, that she'd never let him forget her. It's an extremely 7-year-old thing to say, the kind of promise you make when you don't yet know how long forever can be, and the show, in its quiet, cruel way, lets her actually try to keep that promise for the next 1,000 years. Reminding the Ice King, every time their paths cross, that there's a person inside him she used to know. showing him old photographs. Ice King sings Marceline's old songs, watching him not remember, and going home, and trying again the next time. The episode Simon and Marcy is the seed of that. The first time the audience sees what their relationship actually was. Before the crown, before the centuries. Honestly, I think about Simon and Marcy a fair bit when I'm trying to fall asleep, because it's the kind of episode that just sits in the back of your head. Not in a bad way, in a soft, slightly aching way, like a memory of something you didn't actually live through. The kind of melancholy that doesn't keep you awake, it just settles into you and stays. So that's where Simon ends up, wandering off, mostly gone, becoming the cartoon Ice King will come to know, while Marceline grows up in the ruins and eventually becomes the vampire queen we meet at the start of the show. They're both survivors of the same apocalypse, the same grey years, but the show gives them very different shapes in the present. Simon is a daft cartoon. Marceline is a 1,000-year-old rock star. Both of them carry the weight of having seen the world end and then having to keep living through whatever came after. And speaking of Marceline, since we're already on her, let's talk about who she actually is. Because there's a lot more to her than the 7-year-old in the wasteland. She had a life before Simon. She has a father in another dimension. She's got powers she gathered like a hobbyist over the centuries. And she's, frankly, the coolest character in the entire show. I'll fight you on that one. Quietly, politely, while we both fall asleep. The first thing I want to tell you about Marceline is the bass. The bass guitar she plays, because that one object tells you nearly everything you need to know about her in the present day of the show. It's not just a bass, it's an axe, or rather, it used to be an axe. A great big two-handed battle axe with a heavy blade and a long handle. The kind of weapon you'd swing at people in the dim ancient past, when that sort of thing was a normal solution to interpersonal problems. The axe was, according to her father, a family heirloom. Been in the Abadia family for generations. The sort of thing a 1,000-year-old demon dynasty would, naturally, have lying about in the attic. What did Marceline do with it? She took it to a music shop. She had somebody add pickups and strings and an amplifier jack. She turned the heirloom battle axe into an electric bass. She plays it in her band. She writes punky, sad, weird little songs on it about her father and about loneliness and about her ex-boyfriends. The first time her father, Hunson Abadir, who is the demon lord of the Nightosphere and the official lord of evil, sees what she's done to the axe, his reaction is to ask whether she's turned it into some kind of loot. He's not even angry, he's just baffled, as if his rebellious daughter has done the strangest possible thing she could have done to it, which, frankly, she has. That's Marceline. She'll take a piece of ancient demonic weaponry, modify it into a punk bass, and use it to write a song about how her dad ate her fries. The chip song, by the way, is canon. There is an actual song in the show called the Fry Song, which Marceline wrote about a time her dad ate her fries, and which she sings on a recording in front of him during one of his rampages to remind him of the time he hurt her feelings as a child. The chips are not metaphorical, they are real imps in the lore. The bass is real, the axe was real. The family is dysfunctional in a way that is both demonic and weirdly relatable. Let's talk about who she actually is, properly. Marceline Abadir, in the present of the show, is over 1,000 years old. She doesn't look it because she stopped aging visually somewhere in her late teens, but she has lived through the entire post-Mushroom War period of Earth's history. She has seen kingdoms rise and fall. She has watched humans nearly go extinct. She has personally outlived many of the friends she ever made before she became a vampire. That is a lot of weight for one person to carry, and one of the things the show is very good at is making sure you remember it, even when she's being silly. Her parentage is unusual, even by Adventure Time standards. Her father, Hunson Abadir, is a demon. Specifically, he's the ruler of a hellish dimension called the Nightosphere, where he runs things and eats souls and generally embodies what the show, with characteristic directness, calls chaotic evil. He's old. He might actually be primordially old, in the same league as some of the cosmic monsters we'll talk about later. He's not human. He's not anything you'd recognize as human-shaped most of the time, although he can take a kind of suited and tied businessman form when he wants to be polite about it. Her mother, on the other hand, was just a woman, a human woman named Elise, who somehow met Hunson, fell in love with him, and had a child with him. The show mostly shows us little flashes of Elise. She's voiced in one episode by Rebecca Sugar, who later went off to create Steven Universe, which is its own bit of trivia I find lovely. Elise is gentle, warm, an ordinary mum trying to raise an unordinary child. She loved Marceline. She told her stories about how she met Hunson, with affection rather than bitterness, even though by the time Marceline was old enough to remember, Hunson was already mostly gone from their lives. Marceline raised herself alone. Then the war happened, and then the slow, grim aftermath happened. Elise, by the time Marceline is 7 and wandering the wasteland with Simon, has already died. The show is careful, even cagey, about exactly how. For ages, watching the show in real time, you just had to assume she died in the chaos of the war. But years later, in the special called Obsidian, we got a proper look at what actually happened. Elise was sick. Radiation sickness, the implication is. She knew she was dying. She was trying to get Marceline to a fallout shelter, somewhere safe before she gave out. She didn't quite make it. She left Marceline a recording on a cassette tape with an apology and a goodbye, and then she died, and the little girl was on her own in the dark. The catch is that Marceline, for nearly her entire long life, did not know about the recording. She didn't know there was an apology. She just knew her mum had been there one day and gone the next, and she'd been left wandering the ruins on her own, and the natural conclusion for a small child to draw from, that is that her mother left her on purpose, which is exactly what Marceline believed for 990-something years, that her mother had abandoned her, that she hadn't been worth staying alive for. It's only in the post-finale special Obsidian that she finally hears the recording, hears her mum's actual voice apologizing, hears the truth, which is that Elise loved her and was trying desperately to get her to safety and ran out of time. Marceline, by that point, is in her 1000-and-somethings, sitting next to her girlfriend, listening to a tape of her dead mother on a relic from 1,000 years ago. And she breaks down. Of course she does. A grief that's been sat inside her for 10 centuries finally has somewhere to go. That's the kind of writing Adventure Time does for Marceline. They will let her be silly, they will let her be cool, they will let her drift through her bass riffs and her hoverflying and her sharp-tongued one-liners, and then, every once in a while, they will sit her down and remind you, and her, exactly how much she's been holding. How did she become a vampire? That's the next bit of her backstory. She wasn't born one. Her dad's a demon, her mum was human, and Marceline started life as just a half-demon kid. Technically immortal because of the demon half, but otherwise more or less normal. The vampire thing happened later. In the post-war years, sometime after Simon left her, she was bitten by the original vampire king during her time as a vampire hunter. We'll get into the full vampire history later, when we talk about the Stakes miniseries, because it's a story worth giving its own section. The short version is, she was fighting vampires, she got bitten, and instead of just dying, she absorbed the king's power and kind of inherited the title. Vampire Queen. Comes with the kit. Her powers are a really good example of how Adventure Time builds character, through small accumulations rather than big reveals. She can fly, but only because she absorbed the essence of a vampire called the Fool Who Could Fly. She can turn invisible, but only because she absorbed the essence of a vampire called the Empress. She can heal, shapeshift, levitate, change size, turn into a giant bat. Each of those abilities is, in the lore, a thing she took from a specific dead vampire over the centuries. She is, as a character, a literal patchwork of stolen power, which I think is a very on-brand way for the show to build a vampire queen. Not through a single moment of destiny, but through a long, slow accumulation of fights survived. The one thing she doesn't do, which traditional vampires do, is drink blood. The show makes a point about this. Marceline eats the colour red, specifically the colour, anything red. Apples, strawberries, tomatoes, even just clothing that happens to be red. Although she's polite enough not to drink the colour out of people's clothes without asking, she drains the red from things, and what's left behind is the same object, but pale and grey. Blood appeals to her because blood is red, not because of anything mystical about blood itself. It's a really clever way to keep her vampire-ish without making her a traditional bloodsucker, and it lets the show do its own thing with the mythology. There is a darker note, which the show only really brings up in Stakes. If Marceline goes long enough without consuming red, she enters what the show calls a feral state. She loses control, she'll attack people, she'll drink blood by force because she has to. It's not really her when that happens, it's the vampire half taking over. But it's there. She has to feed regularly to stay herself. And one of the implied prices of being a vampire, which she keeps getting hinted about by the older vampires when they show up, is that there's a deeper cost she hasn't quite figured out yet. Some price for the power. The show flirts with the idea that the price is having to outlive everyone she loves. Watching the world go on, while everyone she ever cared about gets old and dies, which is, frankly, a real cost. The kind of cost you don't notice for the first few decades, but which adds up over centuries. Her relationship with her dad is its own thing, and I love it. Hunson Abadir is just enough of a deadbeat father to be relatable, even though he's the literal Lord of Evil. He pressures her to take over the family business, which is running the Nightosphere and sucking souls. She refuses because she'd rather be a musician. He pops in and out of her life at inconvenient times. He once ate her fries. She wrote a song about it. They love each other, despite everything, and they have one of the most genuinely teenager and her dad relationships in animation, despite both of them being effectively immortal demons. The voice actor for Hunson, by the way, is Martin Olsen, who is the real-life father of Olivia Olsen, who plays Marceline. Casting the same family across the family of characters is the kind of thing that should feel gimmicky, but instead just adds another quiet layer to their scenes together. The other major figure in Marceline's life, who we'll talk about properly soon, is Princess Bubblegum. The two of them, by the end of the show, are openly together as a couple. It's a relationship the show built up over years of episodes, often through hints and silences, and the kind of casual closeness that registered as more than friendship, long before either character would have said so out loud. Their dynamic is its own story, which we'll save for a bit later, because Bubblegum has so much going on in her own right that she deserves her own section. The thing I want to leave you with about Marceline, before we move on, is that she is the show's quiet historian. Bubblegum is also old, and we'll get to her, but Bubblegum is a creator, a builder, a fixer. She's busy. Marceline is the witness. She's the one who actually remembers what things used to look like. She remembers cars. She remembers her mum's voice. She remembers Simon's old jokes. She remembers what it was like to be a small, frightened person in a world that had ended. And she carries all of that in songs and in old objects, and in the slightly too knowing way she looks at things sometimes. The whole long, sad history of Ooo is, in a way, archived in Marceline's head. The show trusts her to carry it for us, while everyone else gets on with the present. That's quite a lot of weight to put on a character who, in the first episode she ever appears in, just turns up to evict Finn and Jake from her old house for a laugh. But that's Adventure Time. You meet somebody as a punchline, and then over 100 episodes, you slowly find out they're carrying the deep history of the world on their shoulders. Right? Let's move on. Because if Marceline is the show's quiet historian, the person on the other side of the equation, the show's quiet engineer, is somebody who came out of an entirely different kind of beginning. Not born to a human and a demon. Just sort of grown like a strange pink houseplant in the wreckage of the war. She gave herself a title and built her own kingdom around her hurt little brother. We should talk about her next. Princess Bubblegum isn't a princess. I mean, she is in the sense that she's the ruler of the Candy Kingdom, and everyone calls her princess, but nobody crowned her. There was a royal lineage for Princess Bubblegum. There was no king and queen who passed the title down to her. She showed up out of a vat of sentient pink goo about 800 years ago, decided to call herself a princess. And nobody really argued with her, because she was the smartest person in the room, and also she'd already started building a kingdom. I find this absolutely brilliant. The Candy Kingdom is, on the surface, this twee little fairy tale realm full of talking cupcakes and gumdrops who all live in a candy castle. It looks like the most generic children's cartoon setting imaginable, and then you actually scratch the surface and discover that the entire thing was put together by one extremely lonely scientist who basically grew herself out of a puddle and then decided she'd rather be in charge. Let me back up. The proper story of Bubblegum's origin is, if anything, even stranger than the summary. The Mother Gum. That's the name the show gives to the thing she came from. The Mother Gum was a sort of giant, vaguely sentient mass of pink bubblegum biomass that emerged in the post-Mushroom War wasteland, somewhere in the rough geographical area where Bubblegum's kingdom eventually got built. we don't get a clean, definitive answer about where exactly the mother gum came from. Although the show's strongest implication is that it's the post-war reincarnation of the original, prehistoric candy elemental. We'll talk about elementals properly soon, but the rough idea is that the candy elemental was one of the 4 ancient cosmic forces that magic in this universe runs on, and after the bomb went off and magic came roaring back, the candy elemental came back with it, in this new, strange, gooey, hive mind form. The mother gum sat in the wasteland for a while, doing whatever a giant mass of sentient bubblegum does with its time, and at some point, individual pieces started peeling off and forming into discrete little beings. One of those beings was a small pink, human-shaped girl who called herself Bonibel. That's Bubblegum's actual name, by the way. Bonibel, Bubblegum. The Bubblegum bit is the surname. The Bonibel bit is the given name. Her friends sometimes call her Bonnie or Peebles or Peebubs, depending on how casual they're being. She wasn't the only one to peel off either. Her younger brother also emerged from the mother gum at roughly the same time. His name is Neddy, and he turned out to be a huge pink candy dragon who unfortunately had a very rough first few minutes of life. According to the flashback in the episode Bonnie and Neddy, Neddy emerged from the mother gum, took a little wobble forward, landed on a sharp rock, hurt himself, and got so utterly traumatized by the experience that he basically never wanted to interact with the outside world again. He retreated into himself. He just wanted to be left alone, somewhere warm and quiet, with no surprises. So the very first thing Bonibel did, as far as we know, before she built any of the kingdom, before she made any of the candy people, before she did anything at all, was build a small cabin around her brother to keep him safe. She found a big tree, planted Neddy at the base of it, and let him drink the nutrients from the tree's roots, which he could do because he was a candy creature with a vague mouth end. And he just sat there, sucking on the tree, producing candy juice as a byproduct, which would later become the fuel for the Candy Kingdom's power, defense, recreation, and economy, while also cleaning and nourishing the kingdom. The entire economy of the Candy Kingdom is, in some sense, based on Neddy's quiet, lifelong drinking of one specific tree, which I find very funny and also deeply sad. Then Bonibel got lonely. She had her brother, but Neddy wasn't going to be conversation, so she started making more candy people. The very first one she made, according to the episode Bonibel Bubblegum, was an uncle figure she named Gumbald. She made him out of more of the mother gum's biomass, animated him, and basically had herself a little family. She also made an Aunt Lolly and a cousin Chikel, the 4 of them living together in this small post-apocalyptic candy household, trying to figure out how to live in the world that was left. This is where it gets a bit Cain and Abel. Gumbald, who Bubblegum had created to be a companion, started developing his own ideas. He thought he should be the one in charge. He thought Bubblegum was too soft, too cautious, and he came up with a particular formula, which he called Dum Dum Juice, which would make whoever drank it cheerful, simple, and easy to manipulate, like a sort of magical lobotomy in liquid form. He tricked Lolly and Chikel into eating cupcakes filled with it as a test run. They turned into different, simpler candy people called Manfred and Crunchy, with no memories of who they used to be. And then he tried to slip the same juice to Bubblegum. She figured out what was happening, and in the resulting scuffle, the bottle of Dum Dum juice splashed onto Gumbald himself, and he was transformed into Punchy. Just a sentient bowl of punch. No memory of his old self. Smiley, helpful. Punchy, as in full of punch. He stuck around the kingdom for centuries in that form, just hanging about, being a beverage. The detail I love about all this, which the show throws away without making a fuss, is that Manfred, the talking decorative wall fixture you see in the Candy Kingdom castle in countless episodes, is technically Princess Bubblegum's aunt. Aunt Lolly transformed into a candy person named Manfred, then later lived in the Candy Kingdom. It is spelled out for the audience. The show just lets you know that the chatty wall ornament is, in some sense, family, and nobody talks about it. After all that drama with Gumbald, Bonibel made the decision that nobody else was going to do this. She was going to be in charge. Gumbald, in his original form, had used the word princess at her sarcastically as a kind of patronizing put-down, and she decided she liked it. She took it as her own title. From then on, she was Princess Bubblegum, and she built the Candy Kingdom around her brother, brick by brick. with her own hands and the help of the candy people she kept making. Watching the kingdom grow up is itself a quiet bit of lore. In one episode, called The Vault, we see flashbacks of the early Candy Kingdom under construction. Just the castle walls and the central tower at first, a river of glowing radioactive sludge running through what would eventually be the main square, which Bubblegum had to cover up with candy before anyone else got hurt. She'd already lost a friend named Shoko to that sludge, a girl who fell in and got mutated and died, and Bubblegum buried the whole river under candy paving stones rather than let it claim anybody else. The Candy Kingdom is, in a real sense, built on top of buried radiation, with sweet shop fronts laid over an old, apocalyptic wound, which is, I think, the perfect Adventure Time metaphor. Bubblegum also designed the Gumball Guardians, those huge round-headed candy giants who stand watch over the kingdom and sometimes ask people maths questions before letting them through the gates. She built them as defense. She built a lot of things as defense. One of the recurring threads of her character is that she has trouble trusting other people, even her own subjects, because she's seen what happens when you don't watch carefully enough. The result is that every few seasons, she ends up doing something a bit too authoritarian, tracking chips in citizens, surveillance cameras everywhere, a secret police force. The secret police force is its own bit of lore that I love, so let me mention it briefly. They were called the Gumball Guards. Bubblegum, at some point in the early years of the kingdom, decided she needed an elite enforcement squad to crack down on crime, so she built a group of sword-wielding candy androids called Gumball Guards, who were extremely good at their jobs and slightly too enthusiastic about violence. She realized, eventually, that she'd built something dangerous, and she ordered them all destroyed. One slipped away and survived in hiding for centuries afterwards, only to be discovered by Finn in a later episode. He'd been living quietly in a junkyard, training himself into a kind of peaceful warrior monk. The show let that whole storyline exist as a small reminder that Bubblegum, for all her good intentions, has a long history of building things that get out of hand. The kingdom eventually became, in Bubblegum's own phrasing, an eternal empire. That's the line she uses in one episode. Eternal empire, said completely matter-of-factly. She doesn't think she's being grand, she just thinks she's stating a fact. The Candy Kingdom will outlast everyone. It is, in her mind, supposed to, and she rules over it the way you might imagine a slightly anxious genius would, which is with a constant low-level hum of trying to keep everyone safe from things they don't even know they should be worried about. Her age is, as I mentioned, all over the place. Visually, she looks like a teenager in some episodes, and an older young woman in others. She's been canonically 13 at one point, 18 at another, and adult-looking at yet others. She can apparently shift her age by changing the chemical composition of her candy body, although she usually settles around 18 or so, because that's the age she finds most useful. She's biologically and possibly literally immortal, by the way, which is one of the things she has in common with Marceline, although she's much more discreet about it. Now, the relationship between Bubblegum and Marceline is one of the show's quietest, slowest, most lovely arcs, and we'll come back to it more than once. The short version, for the moment, is that they were friends, then more than friends, then they had a falling out, then they spent a long time apart, then they slowly came back together, and by the end of the show, and especially the post-show specials, they're a couple, properly together. It happened gradually enough, on screen, that older fans of the show were already half convinced for years before the show actually let them confirm it. There's a really lovely small detail in the Season 3 episode, What Was Missing, where Bubblegum's most prized possession is revealed to be a t-shirt that Marceline gave her years ago. She'd kept it for ages. She'd never told Marceline. Marceline didn't even know she still had it. The reveal is so quiet, so passing, that you almost miss the implications. But the implication is that Bubblegum had been holding on to that shirt for the entire intervening years and never told the person who gave it to her. Which is, frankly, the most teenager-in-love thing imaginable, and the fact that it's said about a literal princess scientist who runs a kingdom just makes it funnier and softer. The other thing I want to mention about Bubblegum, since this section is already getting long, is her relationship with her own subjects. The candy people are, by Bubblegum's design, mostly quite simple. Not stupid exactly, but childlike. They're easily frightened. They love sweet things. They're prone to panic. Bubblegum, who made most of them, treats them with a mix of motherly affection and slight exasperation. She loves them. She also finds them exhausting, She built them simple because she wanted to make sure they could be happy, and instead, she's now in the position of being everyone's mum at all times. There's an episode in the 6th season finale where the Candy Kingdom actually holds an election and votes Bubblegum out of office in favour of a charlatan called the King of Ooo. She has to go into exile for a while. The kingdom regrets the choice fairly quickly. The king turns out to be a complete fraud, and there's a rebellion that brings her back. But she takes the lesson seriously. After that, she's a little less paternalistic, and the kingdom is allowed to be a bit more itself. That's Princess Bubblegum, a scientist who grew herself out of a puddle, built a kingdom around her introverted brother, made her own family from scratch, watched some of them try to overthrow her, took on the title of princess to spite her would-be usurper, and has spent the last 800 years quietly running the most stable kingdom in Ooo while carrying a t-shirt around. She's brilliant, she's a bit of a control freak, she's lonelier than she lets on, and she is, despite the pink hair and the candy crown, very much one of the show's adults, in the way that only old characters who've raised civilizations can be. Right, so we've talked about 3 of the show's oldest survivors now, Simon, Marceline, and Bubblegum. They all came out of the same post-war world in slightly different ways, and they all have 1,000 or so years on the rest of the cast. Before we move forward into the next batch of characters, I want to step way back, millions of years back, because the magic that all of these people are running on doesn't actually start with the war. It's been there since long before any of us were here, and it has its own deep history. The next thing I want to talk about is the elementals. Let me set a scene because I think it works better than just rattling out the lore. Imagine a snowy mountaintop, somewhere on prehistoric Earth, millions of years before any of the stuff we've been talking about. There's a tower built into the rock. Inside the tower, 4 figures are having an argument. They are, in order, an ancient ice wizard, a sort of mossy slime creature, a being made entirely of fire, and a small cheerful person made of candy. They are the elementals. They are the fundamental forces of magic in this universe, and there have always been 4 of them, one for each of the 4 primary elements the show recognizes: ice, fire, slime, and candy. That's right, candy. The show, very early on in its lore building, made the decision that the 4 elements aren't earth, water, fire, and air, the way you'd expect from any normal cosmology. They're ice, fire, slime, and candy. The first time you hear it, it sounds like a joke. The longer you sit with it, the more you realize the show has thought it through. Candy is, in this universe's logic, the elemental force that represents sweetness and warmth and joy. Slime is decay and adaptation. Fire is destruction and energy. Ice is preservation and stillness. They aren't arbitrary. They're a small system of opposing forces, and Adventure Time treats them deadly seriously, even though candy is one of them. The way the system works is that there is almost always one elemental of each kind, alive and walking around somewhere, embodying that force in the world. When one dies or moves on, another rises up to take their place. The elementals are not just magicians, they are the source nodes of magic itself in this universe. Magic flows through them. Without an elemental, that branch of magic falters. In the deep past, the elementals of the dinosaur era are the ones we get to meet first, in the episode Evergreen. The ice elemental of that time was Urgence Evergreen. The candy elemental was a small jelly bean-shaped lady called Chatsbury. The fire elemental was a being called Balthus. The slime elemental was named Slimy D. Yes, Slimy D. The show is consistent in its tone about these things, which is that the names of these primordial cosmic forces are exactly as silly as everything else, while the stories are absolutely deadly serious. Evergreen, the ice elemental, had an apprentice, a small dinosaur somewhere between a velociraptor and a goose, called Gunther. Gunther idolized Evergreen, followed him around, carried his bags, tried to be useful, got mostly ignored or shouted at for his trouble. Evergreen was not a kind master. He was talented and powerful and obsessed with his work, and he didn't really have time to be patient with a child apprentice. But Gunther kept trying, the way kids do. The drama of the Evergreen episode is that the 4 elementals see a comet coming towards Earth. A green comet. They argue about what to do about it. Evergreen wants to invent a magical crown, a piece of jewelry so powerful that it could grant the wearer's deepest wish and use that crown to stop the comet from hitting the planet. The other three elementals are dead against it. They think the crown's too dangerous. They think Evergreen's underestimating how badly it could go wrong. They refuse to help. Evergreen, in a slightly unhinged moment, freezes the other three in place and continues the quest with Gunther. Or rather, he and Gunther go on the quest. They travel a great distance to find the missing component for the crown, which is the magical ruby eyes of an ancient lava creature called Magwood. Evergreen tells Gunther to wait outside while he goes in to get the gems. Of course, things go wrong. Magwood traps Evergreen, who is paralyzed by lava, unable to finish the crown. Gunther rushes in to help his master. He sees the crown sat there, half finished but functional, and Evergreen tells him, basically, you have to put on the crown and wish to stop the comet. Gunther does put the crown on, but the crown doesn't grant the wish you say. It grants your actual deepest wish. The wish you carry around at the bottom of your soul, the one you might not even be admitting to yourself. And Gunther's deepest, most heartbreaking wish, after years of being mistreated and ignored by Evergreen, was to be just like his master, to be the kind of person Evergreen was. Because if he was like Evergreen, then he'd be worthy, then he'd be loved. The crown took that wish at face value. It started transforming Gunther, not into Evergreen exactly, into Gunther's own internal vision of Evergreen, which was an idea, not a person. Gunther saw Evergreen as a cruel, bossy ice wizard who shouted at people and shot ice magic at things. So the crown started turning Gunther into a cruel, bossy ice wizard who shouted at people and shot ice magic at things. He went mad almost immediately. The crown made him exactly the thing he thought he wanted to be, which was a bad version of his abusive master. And then the comet hit anyway. Mass extinction, end of the dinosaurs. Gunther died with the rest of them. But the crown survived. The crown was now imbued with Gunther's last wish, frozen in time. The crown's magic was now permanently shaped by a young dinosaur's desperate longing to be like the man who never loved him. That is the crown Simon Petrikov bought from a dock worker in Scandinavia millions of years later. That's the crown he put on for a laugh in front of Betty. That's why, when Simon wears it, he becomes the Ice King. Why he kidnaps princesses. Why he sometimes acts cruel and bossy without quite meaning to. Why his magical specialism is exactly the kind of cold, controlling, shouty wizardry that Gunther saw in Evergreen. Why he keeps calling people Gunther, all his penguins, his pet, even Marceline sometimes. The name is encoded in the magic itself. The crown is, in a deep magical sense, still trying to fulfill a dinosaur's wish from before there were humans. I want to let that one sit for a minute, because it's the kind of revelation that genuinely upends how you watch the rest of the show. Every time the Ice King does something silly, you remember he's not really doing it. The crown is. The crown's been doing it for about 1,000 years. The show built the saddest possible engine and then put it inside its goofiest character, and the longer you sit with that, the heavier it gets. The other three elementals from Evergreen's era didn't really survive in any meaningful way. They were frozen by Evergreen and presumably either thawed out and died of the comet, or stayed frozen forever, depending on how you read it. The system of 4 elementals keeps regenerating though. New ones come up over time. By the time we get to the Mushroom War, there's a fresh set, and Patience St. Pim, who's the ice elemental from before the war, has a small role to play. Patience knew the war was coming. She and the other elementals of her era had some kind of premonition or shared dream about the bomb falling, and Patience decided that she didn't want to die, so she froze herself, just put herself into a kind of magical cryogenic sleep, encased in ice, for 1,000 years. She popped back out in the middle of the show's main timeline, which is how Finn and Jake end up meeting her. She's a bit of a piece of work, frankly, convinced that she's the rightful matriarch of the elementals, obsessed with restoring the elemental order, and willing to do some genuinely reckless things to get her way, which she does in the Elements miniseries. The Elements miniseries is, by the way, one of the more divisive runs of Adventure Time. It's a multi-episode arc near the end of the show, where Patience triggers the latent elemental power in each of the 3 current princess figures, with the idea of forcing them into their elemental destinies. Princess Bubblegum, it turns out, is the modern candy elemental, reincarnated or descended or simply emerged from the same line as Chatsbury. Flame Princess is the modern Fire Elemental. Slime Princess is the modern Slime Elemental. Patience herself is the modern Ice. And when they're all activated at once and pulled out of balance, the entire Land of Ooo gets transformed into 4 extreme elemental zones. Bubblegum becomes a wide-eyed tyrannical candy queen who turns everyone in her area into mindless candy. Flame Princess becomes a more destructive version of herself, melting parts of the land. Slime Princess becomes an oozing, all-absorbing slime force. The whole world tilts. Finn turns into an immobile candy version of himself. Jake turns into a giant 5-eyed creature. Marceline becomes, of all things, a campfire mascot-style marshmallow, being called Marshmalline. The world is, quite literally, not coping. The way it gets fixed is in the proper Adventure Time fashion, a bit silly and a bit lovely. Lumpy Space Princess, who has spent most of the show being everybody's vaguely annoying friend, turns out to be a kind of 5th element. The 5th element is called Lumps. Lumps is an anti-elemental. Her lumps push back against the elemental purity that Patience has unleashed. With LSP's help and a lot of effort, the 4 princesses are brought back into balance, the world is restored to its normal mixed-up self, and Patience is defeated. Although she ends up frozen again, which feels almost like a slow rhyme with how she started. I love that the show, for all its cosmic seriousness, decided that the way to fix a magic system breakdown was to lean on the character who has, throughout the show's run, been mostly comic relief. Lumpy Space Princess saves the world. And she does it without quite realizing how impressive it is. She just does it because she's stubborn and she misses her friends. A small additional note about the elementals that I want to drop in here. The crown that Simon wears isn't the only one Evergreen made. Or rather, the crown went through a number of phases and was, in some of the spin-off material, replicated or recreated in different forms. There's a version in Fiona and Cake worn by a character called the Winter King. There's an alternate reality version we'll touch on briefly when we talk about Farm World. The crown, as an object, keeps showing up. It seems to want to wear it at all times, and every time it gets one, the wearer becomes some flavour of the same sad story. A person who wished to be like someone they admired, and who got the worst version of that wish granted. There's a phrase in the show, which we'll talk about properly in a later section, that goes, magic, madness, and sadness. It's the closest the show ever gets to a thesis on how its world works. The elementals are an example of that thesis in action. Their magic is real. It works. It does what it says. But it doesn't ever just give you what you want. It gives you a slightly twisted version of what you want, filtered through your own confused longings, and over time it eats the bit of you that asked for it in the first place. Evergreen wanted to save the world. His apprentice destroyed his ambition. Gunther wanted to be loved. He turned into the thing he was scared of. Patience wanted to survive. She did, but she came out cold and a bit cruel after 1,000 years of dreaming about it. The pattern keeps repeating. That's enough on elementals for now, I think. There's more we could go into about the elemental wars that supposedly happened in deep prehistory, about how the Candy Elemental line continued through the Mother Gum, about a few other minor element-adjacent characters. But sleeping is the priority, and I don't want to overstuff this. Just hold on to the shape of it. 4 ancient forces. Always 4. One of them, the Ice one, made a crown that grants wishes. The crown is still out there, still doing its job in a fashion, and the wish at the heart of it is a dinosaur's longing to be loved by a wizard who couldn't manage it. Since we've already brought up comets, though, and the green comet that wiped out the dinosaurs, it's worth talking about what that comet actually was. Because it wasn't just rock and ice. It was in some sense alive. And the thing inside it is the main antagonist of the entire show, and we should probably talk about him. The Lich did not start as a skeleton. The Lich didn't even start as a comet, actually, although that's the form most of us first think of him in. The Lich started as nothing. Or rather, the Lich is a survivor of a time before there was nothing. There's a moment in a fairly late episode, called Gold Stars, where the Lich says, almost casually, that he is older than existence itself, that he was around in a time before there was nothing, that before there was the nothing that preceded the universe, there were monsters, and he was one of them. Adventure Time is, as you may be picking up on, the kind of children's cartoon that will throw a line like that into the middle of an episode and then not particularly explain it. So let me try to walk through what it actually means. The show, over its run, builds up this hint of an enormous, mostly unseen cosmology. There's the universe we see, which contains Ooo and Mars and various other planets. There's a multiverse beyond that, with alternate versions of everyone and everything. There's a time room at the center of the multiverse, which we'll get to. There's a chaotic chaos being called Golb, who operates outside of the regular rules of existence. And before any of that, before there was time, before there was matter, within the void that preceded all of it, there were primordial entities that the show calls monsters. Just monsters. That's the term. Hunson Abadir, Marceline's dad, is one of them. Orgalorg, the Breaker of Worlds, is another. The Lich is, in this telling, theorized by some fans to be one of them too, beings that existed before existence, that survived the transition into reality, and that have been hanging around ever since. That's the deepest cosmic layer of the show. And the Lich somehow came from that layer and ended up inside a comet that crashed into Earth. This brings us to the Catalyst Comet system. The show, which is happy to introduce massive cosmic concepts without making a fuss about them, establishes that every roughly 1,000 years, Earth gets hit by a catalyst comet. These comets are not just rocks, they are physical incarnations of large cosmic forces. Each catalyst comet carries some essence, some idea, some agent of change into our world. They've been doing this for a long time. The show implies that the catalyst comet that hit Earth during the Cretaceous, the one Evergreen tried to stop, was a pink one. The green color wasn't decorative. It was meaning. Green for death. Green for extinction. The comet was the Lich's incarnation. Or one of his incarnations. He's been visiting Earth periodically, in different forms, for an extremely long time. That green comet, the one that killed the dinosaurs, didn't actually wipe out the Lich. It deposited his essence on Earth. The skull-shaped death energy of the Lich went into the ground and stayed there, dormant, for millions of years. Just waiting, patient. He's good at being patient, the Lich. He doesn't really have anywhere to be. He's older than the concept of having places to be. What woke him up was the mushroom bomb, the mutagenic bomb that ended the war. The blast went off, the radiation surged, mutated everything, and the Lich's dormant essence in the soil was finally given a body. He possessed one of the war's victims, somebody who'd been submerged in the mutagenic waste, and emerged as the skeletal, glowing-eyed, deeply creepy figure we know him as in the show. The Lich is, in a sense, a side effect of the bomb, a creature that the war's worst weapon woke up by accident, which is appropriate because his stated, openly said goal is the extinction of all life. That's it. That's his program. He doesn't have nuance. He doesn't have politics. He doesn't have personal grudges. He just wants everything alive to stop being alive. When the show first introduces him, in the Season 2 episode called His Hero, he's a creature trapped in amber inside the Candy Castle. The hero Billy, who in the deep lore is essentially the Hercules of this world, had defeated and imprisoned the Lich centuries earlier. Bubblegum kept him in amber inside the kingdom, the way you'd keep a particularly nasty piece of weaponized radiation, just sealed up and watched over. He escaped. He started to do his extinction thing. Finn beat him, just about, but not with the gauntlet of the hero, which was Billy's old gear. That was Finn's first proper run-in with a cosmic tier antagonist. It wasn't his last. The Lich kept coming back, in different forms. As a snail of all things, in one episode. As a possessed Princess Bubblegum, briefly. As Billy in disguise, fooling Finn and Jake into helping him fulfill his goal. He's tricky. He's one of the show's smarter villains, despite his single-minded focus. There's an episode called The Lich in Season 4 that's probably the most pivotal one for understanding him cosmically. Finn and Jake, tricked by the Lich, who's pretending to be Billy, end up traveling to the Time Room at the center of the multiverse. The Time Room is the home of a wish-granting cosmic being called Prismo, who we'll talk about in the next section. The Lich gets into the Time Room and uses Prismo's wish-granting ability to wish for, and I quote, the extinction of all life. Prismo is bound by his job to grant the wish. He does. The Lich's wish kicks off, and across the entire universe, life starts to wink out. The way the show resolves this is genuinely brilliant. Finn, in panic, makes a counter-wish. He wishes that the Lich never existed. Prismo grants that one too, which kicks the timeline backwards into an alternate version of reality where the Lich was never around. In that timeline, the Mushroom War still happened, but the mutagenic bomb didn't have the Lich in it to corrupt, so the bomb actually got stopped by Simon at the last moment. We'll come back to that whole alternate timeline later. The short version is that Jake, also panicked, makes a third wish for the world to go back to normal. The universe stutters back into shape, the Lich's extinction wish is undone, and everybody survives. Sort of. The Lich himself takes a beating during this. By the time the dust settles, his physical form has been melted down by some kind of cosmic process and reshaped into the body of a small green baby. The baby is adopted by Lemongrab and called Sweet Pea. Sweet Pea is, canonically, the reformed reincarnation of the Lich. He's a sweet kid, he's gentle, he has occasional glimpses of his old self in his nightmares, but he genuinely does seem to be a new person, raised differently, given a different chance. The Lich, in a sense, has been redeemed by being turned into a small green child who's loved by his weird lemon family, which is, I think, one of the most genuinely radical narrative choices the show ever made. The literal embodiment of cosmic death gets a second go-round as somebody's son. Across the post-show specials, we get more confirmation that the Lich's motivation isn't just nihilism. In the Fiona and Cake spin-off, in an episode called Casper and Nova, we find out that the Lich's whole program of universal extinction was, in his head, a religious act. He was a follower of Golb, the cosmic chaos being. He saw himself as Golb's last scholar. He wanted to extinguish all life in honor of his god, which is, frankly, the kind of dark theology kids' cartoons don't usually attempt. The Lich is doing religion. Bad religion, very bad religion, but religion. He thinks he's worshipping. He thinks ending the world is a sacrament. Now, back to the Catalyst Comet system, because it explains more than just the Lich. Across the series, several other comets have shown up, in different colours, each representing a different cosmic essence. There's a yellow one, way back, there's a blue one, there's a purple one, and each of them brought something specific into the world. The yellow comet, way before the war, was the one that brought Orgolorg, the breaker of worlds, into the solar system. Orgolorg is a primordial space monster, one of those before-the-universe creatures we mentioned earlier. He'd been trying to absorb a catalyst comet to make himself even more powerful, and the four-aspect Martian deity called Grob-Gob-Glob-Grod, more on them in a moment, was sent to stop him. Grob-Gob-Glob-Grod did stop him, just barely, by knocking him out of the sky. Orgolorg fell to Earth. He was hit so hard by Earth's gravity that his body was compressed into a different shape entirely. A small, harmless-looking shape. A penguin. That penguin is Gunter, the Ice King's pet, the waddling little bird who steals snacks and waddles around the Ice Kingdom. The Ice King's most loyal companion is, canonically, a primordial cosmic horror that got squashed into bird form by a planetary impact. The show, of course, does not make this its main joke. It doesn't even particularly emphasize it. It just lets that fact sit there in the background, occasionally winking at it. There's an episode where Orgolorg's full form briefly re-emerges from inside Gunter, attempting to swallow a different comet, and you remember, oh yes, that penguin is actually a god. Then the moment passes and we're back to the bird stealing pickles. The blue Catalyst Comet, somewhere after that, brought to Earth what we eventually find out was one of Finn's past lives. The blue comet is the embodiment of pure good. Just as the green comet was pure death, the blue comet was pure life. It hit Earth at some point, perhaps before the war, perhaps shortly after, and its essence became a sequence of small good creatures across time. A butterfly, a pink, jellyfish-looking thing, a young human-like girl named Shoko, who befriended Bubblegum centuries ago, and eventually, Finn. Finn is, in some cosmic sense, the same essence the blue comet brought. He's the universe's counterweight to the Lich. They're both old, they both keep coming back, they balance each other. Which is, on rewatch, one of the things that makes Finn's role in the series feel earned. He isn't just a brave kid, he's the latest iteration of the cosmos' tendency to try to do good. The purple Catalyst Comet is the one we actually see arrive during the show's run in an episode called The Comet. It hits towards the very end of Season 6. Finn meets it. The comet, taking on the form of a wise old purple presence, shows Finn that he is the incarnation of past comets and offers him the chance to ascend or remain in his flesh form, which he chooses to do. Finn turns it down. He isn't done with this life yet. He's got people he cares about. The comet smiles, basically, and goes on its way, taking Orgalorg with it as Orgalorg makes one last bid to absorb it. Finn manages to stop Orgalorg's attempt, critically injuring him, which sends Gunter back to being a normal penguin. I think about the comet a fair amount, actually, because of how casual the show is about the implications. Finn is, on a cosmic level, the same essence as a butterfly and a small thief and a comet. He's been a lot of things. He could leave this body and become something else. He chooses not to. He chooses to stay being a 13-year-old boy with a dog. That's, in its own quiet way, one of the more moving choices made by a protagonist in animation. He picks the small, ordinary, finite life over the cosmic, infinite one. He picks staying with Jake. He picks the bacon pancakes. Jake picks the bacon pancakes. Alright, so the Lich is a cosmic death entity older than existence, currently reborn as a small redeemed baby called Sweet Pea. Catalyst comets are how the universe periodically delivers agents of change to Earth. Finn is, on the deep level, the universe's counterweight to the Lich. Orgalorg is squashed into a penguin and minding his own business, and the deepest cosmology of the show is, frankly, mad. But since we've already brought up the Time Room and Prismo, let's keep going up the cosmic ladder, because Prismo isn't even at the top. There's more above him, and the thing above him is the only being in the show that genuinely scares everyone else. Golb is the most powerful being in the entire show, and he almost never actually shows up on screen. That's the trick. That's what makes him work. The way Adventure Time uses Golb is, I think, one of the smartest pieces of villain shaping in animation. Most shows, when they introduce their ultimate cosmic threat, want to give you a good look, a big reveal, a monologue, a big design moment with dramatic lighting. Adventure Time, instead, keeps Golb mostly off-screen for the entire run of the show, drops his name into conversations a few times, lets you feel the weight of him through other characters' reactions, and only finally lets him properly arrive in the finale, by which point the audience has been quietly building him up in their own heads for years. Golb stands for, well, actually, the show never explains what Golb stands for. It's just his name, said the way you'd say a word, with the O long enough to feel a bit unnerving. Golb. He's an embodiment of chaos, not in the playful, mischief-making sense. In the deep, structural, things stop making sense. Reality bends when he's nearby. Logic stops working. Probability phrase. The show makes him scary not by giving him a power set, but by making it clear that, in his presence, the rules don't apply. You first hear about him through Magic Man, of all characters. Magic Man is one of the show's recurring side figures, a deeply weird, somewhat antagonistic, deeply unstable wizard who likes to torment Finn and Jake with little practical jokes that turn out to have lasting consequences. For ages, he's just a sort of nuisance villain. Then, slowly, his backstory comes out. He used to be a sane, kind, beloved man. He had a wife. Her name was Margles. They lived on Mars. Together. He was a leader. He had purpose. Then Golb took Margles. Margles, this person Magic Man loved more than anything, was simply taken by Golb's presence. Not killed in a normal way. Not buried. Just unmade. Magic Man, devastated, then proceeded to spend an enormous amount of time traveling across the multiverse, looking for her, looking in every reality he could find, looking in dead worlds and abandoned realities and places where physics worked differently. And what he found out, eventually, was that Golb hadn't just taken his Margles. Golb had taken every Margles, in every possible reality. She was simply gone, everywhere. The only Margles left were the ones in his memory and his feelings, which is, the show says, the only place she existed anymore. That's the kind of villain Golb is. He does kill you. He erases you. From every version of everything. Magic Man's madness, his cruelty, his playfulness with other people's pain, all of it is the result of having spent untold time looking for somebody who can't be found. Magic, madness, and sadness again, just the largest possible version of it. Magic Man, in his desperation, eventually went to the Time Room. The time room is the center of the multiverse, a quasi-corporeal dimension existing outside of regular space and time, and the being who lives there is called Prismo. Prismo is the wish granter, the cosmic wishmaster. Magic Man went to Prismo and wished for Margle's back. Prismo, who can grant nearly any wish, found that he couldn't grant this one. Golb's existence was somehow more permanent than wish granting could undo. That's how powerful Golb is. He's above Prismo. He's above the wish system. The cosmic background rules just don't apply to him. Let me talk about Prismo, since we've arrived at him. He's, frankly, my favorite cosmic entity in the entire show. The Wishmaster of the Time Room. He looks like a pink, mostly flat shadow stuck to a wall with a friendly face. He lounges around in his dimension, throwing parties for his cosmic friends and granting wishes to whoever wanders into his space. He's incredibly powerful. He's also unbelievably chilled out. The way he grants wishes is delightful and slightly dangerous. He doesn't have to grant any wish he's given, more or less. That's the deal. But the way he interprets the wish is up to him, and Prismo, being a being of considerable wit and patience, tends to grant wishes in ways that have, let's say, twists. Finn wishes the Lich never existed, and Prismo grants it by making an entire alternate timeline where the Lich never existed, but the rest of the world adjusts in unexpected ways. The Lich himself wishes for the extinction of all life, and Prismo grants it, technically, while looking for loopholes. Jake wishes that Finn will be safe, and Prismo finds ways to fulfill that too. The wishes don't always work. The question is always whether the wisher really wanted what they asked for. Prismo himself, here's the bit I love, is not actually an independent being. He's the dream of someone else. Specifically, he is the manifested dream of an old man, somewhere in the multiverse, who is sleeping in a bed. As long as the old man sleeps, Prismo exists. If the old man wakes up, Prismo stops. Just like that. The cosmic wish granter at the center of the multiverse is one accidental rollover away from popping like a soap bubble. That detail is, to me, the perfect example of Adventure Time's approach to cosmology. It builds a being of immense power, gives him the run of the multiverse, lets him grant wishes that reshape reality, and then casually mentions that he's the dream of a sleeping old man and could end at any time. It's funny. It's also slightly terrifying. It's also kind of beautiful, in a way I can't quite articulate at 1 in the morning. The most powerful being you'll meet in Adventure Time is held together by somebody else's nap. There's an episode called Wake Up, where Finn and Jake find out about the sleeping old man, and they wake him up to commit a cosmic crime, which would unmake Prismo. They try to avoid disturbing him, although events conspire against them, and Prismo does briefly stop existing, and the show treats it as a real loss. Prismo, of course, comes back because cosmic dream beings can be reconstituted if you put in the effort, but the moment when he flickers out and his little yellow cube goes empty is one of the show's quiet emotional gut punches. While we're in the time room area of the cosmology, let me introduce a few of the others who hang around Prismo's place. Prismo apparently throws excellent parties. The guest list, as we see in one episode, includes the Cosmic Owl, who shows up in dreams as a kind of omen, especially in dreams that foretell people's deaths, called croak dreams in the show. Party God, who is exactly what he sounds like. Death himself, a horse-headed gentleman who runs the underworld, and a 4-aspect deity called Grob Gob Glob Grod, who are the rulers of Mars. Grob Gob Glob Grod are 4 creatures, each representing a different aspect of their godly nature. Together they make up the Martian leadership. They're nominally good. They keep an eye on Earth from their planet. They were the ones who knocked Orgalorg out of the sky and into a penguin. They're the ones who originally sent Magic Man to Mars as a king, before he lost his mind. They're, in a sense, the universe's quiet referees, although by the time the show ends, they've mostly stepped back from active intervention. There's one episode where one of the heads, Glob, dies in a heroic sacrifice to save Earth from another incoming threat. Mars is a sadder place after that. Even the gods in this universe don't all make it. Coming back to Golb, because he matters for the finale. Golb shows up properly in the last episode of the main series, Come Along With Me. He's been summoned or attracted by the chaos of the Gum War, which is a war Bubblegum's uncle Gumbald has been stirring up. The chaos draws Golb in. He arrives, the skies darken, reality starts to ripple. He eats Ice King and Betty in a single moment. just absorbing them into his body, and the entire crisis of the finale becomes about stopping Golb before he eats everything else. The way they actually defeat him is, characteristically, more emotional than tactical. Betty, who's been desperately trying to fix Simon for ages, who's become a wizard herself by that point, comes to a decision. Inside Golb, she finds the crown, finds Simon, finds her chance. She wishes, using the crown's wish-granting magic that we discussed back in the Elementals section, for Simon to be safe, to stay Simon forever. The crown grants the wish. Simon is restored permanently, and Betty, in completing the wish, merges herself with Golb. The two become a new entity, sometimes called Golbetty, which is then powerful enough to leave Ooo and depart from the world. Betty is gone in any normal sense. She is now part of the cosmic chaos entity, but Simon is whole. It's, in classic Adventure Time fashion, both a victory and a heartbreak. Simon spends the rest of his story knowing what Betty did for him. He visits the Fiona and Cake spin-off carrying that weight. He becomes a teacher at Wizard City. He's alive. He's himself. But the woman he loved has merged with a chaos god to save him, and there's no undoing that. The show doesn't pretend otherwise. It lets him have his life back, and it lets him carry the cost of having it back, in equal measure. Golb, post-finale, is still out there. He's part of the show's permanent cosmic background now, bigger than Prismo, bigger than anything else in the universe, and, when Betty finally let him merge with her, possibly slightly less destructive than he used to be. Possibly. The show is careful not to spell that out, it just lets you hope. I want to mention one more cosmic entity, just briefly, because she shows up in the spin-off, and she's interesting. Prismo's boss. In the Fiona and Cake series, we find out that Prismo has a boss, somebody who oversees the wish granters. The Scarab checks his work. The boss is a small, serious figure who comes around occasionally to audit. The reveal that Prismo answers to someone is one of those Adventure Time moments where you realize the universe just keeps going up. There's always a higher cosmic layer. Prismo is huge. Prismo's boss is bigger. Prismo's boss probably has a boss. The show, sensibly, stops there, because if you keep going up, you eventually have to write the actual top of the cosmos, and nobody's brave enough to do that. Right, so that's the upper layers of the show's cosmology. In summary, Golb at the very top, or near it. Prismo's boss somewhere up there too. Prismo running the wish-granting middle layer, the cosmic owl drifting through dreams, Death running the afterlife, the Martian gods watching from a slightly closer distance. Below all of them, the universe itself, with its planets and its multiverses and its post-apocalyptic Earth, where most of the show actually happens. And down on the surface of that Earth, in a tree fort, in a grassy meadow, completely unaware of most of this for most of the show, lives a kid named Finn. We should come back down to him next, because for all the cosmic stuff, the show is really, at its heart, about a boy and his dog and a world that's older than they understand. And Finn's story, his actual personal backstory, is its own quiet bit of lore that took most of the show's run to come out. For a very long time, Finn thought he was the last human in the world. That is a load to put on a 12-year-old. The show is, in retrospect, very tender with how it handles this. It doesn't make a constant misery of it. It just lets you know, in small moments, that Finn carries this around. He looks at himself in the mirror sometimes and registers that he's the only one of his kind that he's ever seen. He hears stories of humans from before the war and tries to picture them. He notices when a slightly humanoid creature shows up, whether they're a human or not. He's looking all the time without quite admitting that he's looking. The official origin story Finn knows about himself for most of his life is the Boom Boom on a Leaf story. That's what he tells people about when he tells them his origin. Finn was found in the forest as a baby. He had, according to him, just made boom, boom, which is the show's word for the obvious thing, on a large leaf, slipped on it, fallen down, and been crying on the ground until two passing dogs picked him up. Those dogs were Joshua and Margaret, a married pair of detective adventurer types, and they decided, on the spot, to adopt the small human baby they'd just found in the muck. Their own son, Jake, was an infant at the time, and they figured a brother for Jake wouldn't hurt. So Finn grew up in a family of dogs. That's the entire backstory Finn has for the first chunk of the series. Washed up on the shores, raised by dogs, eventually learning who his parents are and where he came from. He sometimes makes wistful jokes about it. Once, when Jake is asked about it, Jake tells Finn he came from a cabbage, which Finn finds both funny and unsatisfying. The point is, Finn doesn't know, and every other character he meets seems to know more about themselves and the world than he does. The first hint that Finn's story is bigger than the leaf comes when he starts learning about humans more broadly. Bubblegum tells him at one point that humans are extinct, that after the war, the species more or less died out. There are former humans who became other things, the oozers we mentioned earlier, the businessmen who got mutated by mushroom magic, a few survivors who got changed in stranger ways. But proper humans, in the original biological sense, are basically gone. Finn is, as far as Bubblegum can tell, the last one, which is, again, a lot for a 12-year-old to hear. That information is, eventually, revealed to be slightly wrong, or at least incomplete. Other humans were revealed to exist, though they remained unknown until the Islands miniseries. They just weren't in Ooo, they were somewhere else. The somewhere else is the Islands, and the existence of the Islands, and the people on them, and Finn's connection to them, is revealed in the Islands miniseries arc during the show's 8th season. It's not until the Season 8 miniseries called Islands that we get the proper answer to who Finn really is and where he came from. The miniseries is 8 episodes long, and it's the one big run of Adventure Time that's all about Finn's personal backstory. I'd argue it's one of the show's best self-contained arcs. It also delivers one of the saddest revelations in the series, in its own slightly understated way. Here's what we learn. Way back, just after the Mushroom War, when humanity was on the edge of extinction in Ooo, a small group of survivors led by a guy called Two Bread. Tom managed to repair a pre-war ship and set sail. They left the continent. They sailed for a long time. Eventually, they found an archipelago, a chain of islands, in the ocean southwest of Ooo. They settled there. They founded a new human civilization, isolated from everything that had happened to the mainland. They built up a quiet, controlled, fairly advanced society with the help of pre-war technology they'd hung on to. And they built a giant robotic guardian to make absolutely certain no humans ever left the islands and no danger ever reached the islands. The guardian was, in effect, a wall, a very large, very serious wall. So humans weren't extinct, they were just hiding. They'd been hiding for 1,000 years on a chain of small islands, while everyone in Ooo assumed they were gone, including Finn's adoptive family, including Bubblegum, including Finn himself, until he found out otherwise. Finn's actual parents were 2 of those islanders. His father, Martin Mertens, was a con man, a real one, a small-time grifter who'd been running schemes on the islands and accumulating enemies. His mother, Minerva Campbell, was a doctor, a genuinely kind, dedicated woman who worked at the local hospital and tried her best with everybody, including her unreliable husband. Martin and Minerva had Finn as an infant, and for a brief moment they were a family. Then Martin's past caught up with him. Specifically, a woman he'd conned in a past scheme came back looking for revenge. Martin, panicking, grabbed baby Finn and fled the house with him while Minerva was at work. He took a small raft, put himself and the baby on it, but the Guardian inadvertently pushed the raft, carrying them out to sea. The raft was attacked by the island's giant robotic Guardian, who didn't recognize it as authorized. Martin and Finn got separated in the chaos. Martin disappeared. Baby Finn ended up adrift on the raft, alone, floating away from the islands, towards the great post-apocalyptic continent of Ooo. He drifted for ages, presumably, although the show doesn't dwell. He ended up beached on the mainland of Ooo. He crawled or wriggled or somehow ended up in the forest, where, eventually, an infant Finn was found on a leaf by Joshua and Margaret. The leaf was real. The boom boom was probably real. But the bigger story behind it was that he'd been a passenger on a fugitive's raft, abandoned without meaning to be, separated from a mother who never knew what had happened to him. When Finn does eventually find the islands, late in the show, the reunion is not what you'd expect. By the time he gets there, his mother Minerva is no longer flesh and blood. She'd been a doctor on the islands when, decades earlier, a plague had nearly wiped out the human population a second time. To prevent that from ever happening again, she'd worked with her colleagues to transfer her consciousness into hundreds of robots, becoming a kind of motherly artificial intelligence that commanded an army of robotic helper bodies. The flesh and blood Minerva died years ago. What Finn meets is a series of robot bodies, each running Minerva's mind, who looks at him and recognizes him as her son. That reunion. I keep going back to it. Finn meets his mother for the first time in his life, and his mother is a benevolent digital consciousness inhabiting robot frames. She's still her, in the ways that matter. She still loves him. She still has the warmth and the fear and the overprotectiveness of a parent who lost a child decades ago. But she's not, in the conventional sense, a person anymore. She's something else, and Finn has to figure out how to feel about that on the spot. Minerva's instinct, having found her son alive, is to keep him on the islands forever, safe, out of harm's way. The islands are a controlled environment. The Ooo continent is full of monsters and danger and dragons. She wants him to stay. She wants to lock him in. It's a recognizable parent impulse, exaggerated by the fact that she's spent 1,000 years as a worried AI. Finn, kindly but firmly, has to show her a montage of his most helpful acts to change her mind. He has to explain that he loves his life in Ooo, that his job, his calling, is helping people, that he can't just stop, even for her. She, eventually, listens. She lets him go. She turns off the Guardian Wall, opens the islands up, and invites the humans to choose for themselves whether to come back to the mainland. Most of them, in the moment, choose to stay, which is, I think, one of the more pointed bits of commentary the show offers. They've been comfortable, they've been safe, they've been technologically advanced. Many of them, on one of the other islands, are living in a giant virtual reality machine, basically logged into a pre-internet society and never coming out. Finn finds them, talks to a few of them, and realizes that they're not exactly thriving. They're alive, they're protected. They're also, in a real sense, not really there. The show doesn't shout about this. It just lets it land. One human does choose to leave the islands. A woman named Frida, who happened to be the childhood best friend of a character we already knew, called Susan Strong. Susan, by the way, also turns out to be from the islands. She'd left them as a young woman, lost her memory, and ended up in Ooo as an oddly muscular, slightly feral, kind of human but not quite character we'd been seeing in the show for ages, without realizing her true origins. The Islands miniseries is the one where Susan finally gets her own backstory filled in, and it's a genuinely moving reunion when she finds Frida. Frida leaves the islands with Kara, Susan. Susan goes back to Ooo. The rest of the islanders, mostly, stay where they are. The Guardian is deactivated. The choice is now genuinely free. And Finn, having found his roots, having seen his species, having met his AI mother, having decided that none of it changes who he wants to be, goes back to Ooo. He goes back home, basically, which is, in the end, the kindest thing the Islands arc says about Finn, that his real home isn't the place he was born. It's the place he was raised, by a family that wasn't quite his family by blood, in a world that wasn't quite the one he was meant for. He fits there. He chose to fit there. That choice is, in the show's logic, more important than the genetic story. There's one other Finn family detail worth mentioning, which is his dad Martin. Finn does eventually meet Martin again in an earlier arc. Martin had survived the raft incident by being abducted by a cosmic prison called the Citadel, where he'd spent the intervening years as an inmate. Finn breaks him out, hoping for a father-son reunion. What he gets is the truth. Martin is still a con man, still a deeply unreliable man, still primarily interested in his own survival. He doesn't really want to be Finn's dad. He's polite about it, but he leaves. He goes off into space with Finn. Finn loses an arm in the process, in a series of events that are more complicated than they need to be for this section. The point is, Finn's father turns out to be a disappointment in person, and Finn has to learn to live with that. Some kids meet their absent dads, and it's a beautiful reunion. Some kids meet them, and it isn't. Finn's was the second kind. I want to wrap this section with a small note on Finn's growth across the show, because it's one of the things Adventure Time gets the most right. Finn starts the show as a roughly 12-year-old kid, brash, sword-happy, full of righteous energy, a bit of an idiot in the way young kids are. By the end of the show, he's a young man in his late teens, a bit quieter, a bit more thoughtful, slower to swing the sword, and quicker to listen. The change happens gradually, over 100+ episodes, and you only really notice it when you compare the bookends. Adam Muto, who eventually took over as showrunner, has said it's the character development he was most proud of writing. Finn growing from an aggressive, reckless boy into a more measured young man. The fights stop being the point. The relationships start being the point. That's Finn. A baby on a raft. A baby on a leaf. A boy with a sword. A young man with one arm and a quiet sense of who he is. One of the humans in Ooo by his own choice to bring the island survivors back with him. And speaking of how he got found in the forest, we should probably talk about the brother who found him. Because Jake the dog has his own quietly weird origin story that the show didn't get around to revealing until the very end. For nearly the entire run of Adventure Time, you can comfortably assume that Jake is just a magic dog. He's a small orange bulldogish thing who can stretch his body into any shape, change his size, and generally bend his form however he likes. He calls them his stretchy powers. He himself thinks he got them from rolling around in a magic mud puddle as a puppy. That's his explanation when asked. The mud puddle theory, said with the confidence of a dog who has not done a lot of homework on the matter. He's wrong about the mud puddle. The truth, which the show takes about 10 seasons to fully spell out, is significantly weirder. Let me back up. Finn's adoptive parents are Joshua and Margaret, the same dogs who found baby Finn on the leaf. Joshua and Margaret were detectives by trade, although the show plays a bit loose with what that actually means. They took on cases. They went out into the woods to investigate strange things. They were generally competent and brave and willing to wade into a weird situation if a friend asked them to. One of those cases is what led to Jake's birth. There's a short series of episodes called Joshua and Margaret Investigations, which are flashbacks to the parents' detective work before either Jake or Finn were around. In one of these flashbacks, they're called out to Tree Trunks' place. Tree Trunks, the small elephant who lives in the apple orchard, had seen a strange creature in the woods nearby. She wasn't sure what it was. She wanted somebody to look into it. So Joshua and Margaret went out into the forest to track down whatever it was. They found it. The creature was, in the original sighting, in the form of a cat. It looked harmless. It looked unusual, but not aggressive. Joshua, ever the brave one, went to investigate. The creature bit him on the head, just clamped down on his skull and bit. Margaret rushed in, the creature scarpered, and Joshua came home with a bite wound that didn't seem to heal properly. It started to swell. He developed a great big boil on his head, which got bigger by the day, and which they couldn't get a doctor to do anything about. They went about their lives, hoping the boil would just go away. The boil did not go away. It got bigger. Eventually, it popped. And out of the boil, fully formed and squirming, came a puppy. A small yellow puppy with the same colouring as Joshua and Margaret. They looked at the puppy. They looked at each other. They were already a family with a young son called Jermaine. They decided that, well, all right. They had a second son now, and they were going to call him Jake. That is, canonically, how Jake the dog was born. Out of a head boil on his father's skull. Joshua is, technically, Jake's biological mother, which is the kind of sentence that requires you to sit down for a moment. The creature that bit Joshua, which everyone assumed was a one-off weirdo, was actually called Warren Ampersand, a shapeshifter. A blue, five-eyed, extra-dimensional alien being from another reality entirely, who had come to Earth, well, to do exactly what he did to Joshua. Pass on his venom DNA to a compatible host and produce offspring. That's Warren's whole reproductive method. He bites a being, the being develops a boil, the boil produces a child, and the child inherits Warren's shape-shifting abilities. Jake's stretchy powers, in other words, are not from a mud puddle. They're a biological inheritance from a five-eyed alien who briefly attacked his dad in the woods. The same biology that lets Warren change shape lets Jake stretch and squash and twist. It's all the same gene, basically, passed on through the boil. The show drops hints about this for ages without quite confirming it. There's an episode called Orb where Jake has a strange dream featuring Warren's silhouette. There's an episode called Abstract where Jake briefly transforms into a giant, monstrous, blue-skinned, multi-eyed creature that doesn't look anything like a dog, before reverting back to himself. By the time the show gets around to its 10th and final season, the audience is mostly primed for the reveal, but the reveal is still satisfying when it lands. The reveal happens in an episode called Jake the Starchild. Warren looking older and weaker than the cat form we glimpsed in the flashback, comes back into Jake's life. He introduces himself as Jake's other dad. He takes Jake to a home planet, somewhere outside our reality, which is full of Warren's people, all looking glad to see him. He shows Jake a museum he's built in Jake's honor, full of memorabilia about Jake's life. He tells Jake there's a prophecy. He says he's been watching over Jake the whole time. He's loving. He's grandfatherly. He's everything you'd want a long-lost cosmic parent to be. He's lying. The whole planet is an illusion. The museum is set dressing. The prophecy is a manipulation tactic. Warren's actual plan, the plan he's run on all his many offspring across many centuries, is to bring his children to him under false pretenses, get them to use their stretchy powers near him, and slowly drain their life force into himself, regaining his youth at the cost of their lives. He's a parasitic shapeshifter. He's done this to all his other offspring. He's dying now and he wants to live longer, and Jake is just the latest victim he's set up. Warren almost gets away with it. He puts a belt on Jake, gives himself a matching one, and through the magic of the belts, starts stretching Jake while siphoning the resulting life force into himself. Jake notices eventually. Warren confesses, sort of, says Jake was the only one he ever felt bad about doing it to, which is the kind of partial apology a manipulative parent would offer. Jake fights back. They have a brief, painful, slightly touching tussle. Jake wins, just about, by switching the belts and reversing the stretch. Warren ages rapidly, becomes furious, says he'll just go drain Jake's children instead. Jake has 5 pups with Lady Rainicorn, his rainbow unicorn girlfriend, who we should mention because she's important to him, and tries to escape in a rocket. Jake jumps into the rocket, throws it. Warren goes flying into a black hole. His last words, as he disappears into the singularity, are, "I'm going 4D, baby," which is either the dying brag of a defeated villain or, knowing the show, possibly the truth. The show is intentionally ambiguous about whether Warren actually dies or whether he transcends to some higher dimension. Either way, he's gone, and Jake's pups are safe. That's Jake's secret origin. A half-shapeshifter alien hybrid, born from a head bite from his alien parent, raised believing his powers came from mud, taken decades to find out the truth, and ultimately rejecting his cosmic parent in favor of the dog family who actually loved him. The whole thing reframes Jake. He's not just a magic dog. He's a hybrid of 2 completely different forms of life, and he lives as one of them. A small detail I keep returning to. Jake's daughter, Jake Jr., has a mouth shape that doesn't quite look like the rest of her dog Rainicorn body. There's a particular slit mouth detail, sometimes nicknamed the peeper by fans, that resembles Warren Ampersand's mouth. It's inherited, presumably from Warren, through Jake to Jake Jr. The fans noticed this years before the show explicitly explained Warren. The hint was there in the character design the whole time. I think it's a lovely piece of long-game world-building. You can be looking at a perfectly normal-seeming cartoon character, and her face contains a clue to a cosmic alien parentage that nobody's mentioned yet. While we're talking about Jake, I should probably mention Jake's family, properly. He's got a half-brother, Jermaine, who's Joshua and Margaret's actual biological son. Jermaine is a regular dog, no shape-shifting. He's a bit of a sad sack character, honestly. He stayed in the family home after Joshua and Margaret died, looking after the place and the magical artifacts that built up there, while Jake and Finn went off to live in their tree fort. Jermaine has a complicated relationship with Jake, mostly involving feeling like he was the less favourite child. They reconcile, eventually, in an episode where Jermaine actually helps Jake understand his shapeshifter side, which is its own quiet thing. Jake also has a partner, Lady Rainicorn. She's a rainbow-coloured unicorn who speaks Korean as her first language. They met early in the show. They're, by every measure, completely in love. They have 5 pups together: Jake Jr., TV, Kim Kil-wan, Charlie, and Viola. The pups are all hybrid dog rainicorns, each with their own personalities and lives. By the time the show ends, they have grandchildren, including a granddaughter called Bronwyn, who shows up in the post-show Distant Lands special with her own little arc. Jake is, despite being a magic stretchy alien dog, a fairly devoted family man. He likes being a dad, he likes being a grandfather, he likes being a son and a brother and a friend. There's a brief mention in some of the lore that Jake had a slightly less savoury past before the show, where he was part of a small criminal gang. He ran around with a few characters, including a girlfriend called Monica, before eventually settling down with Lady and becoming an adventurer with Finn. The criminal gang phase doesn't come up much, but it's there. Jake has, in his back pages, the kind of unflattering bits a lot of grown-up characters have, which is part of what makes him feel like a real person, even though he's a yellow, stretchy cartoon dog. A small personal thing about Jake before we move on. Jake is, in my opinion, the warmest character in the show. He's not the deepest, he's not the smartest, he's not even always the most reliable, because he's prone to giving extremely bad advice with extreme confidence. But the heart of him, the bit that makes him work, is that he loves his brother absolutely and unconditionally. And he loves his family, and he tries to make people happy. He's not complicated, he's just genuinely good in a slightly daft way. Which is, frankly, what every kid's cartoon needs at its centre. The Jake the Star Child episode, where all this Warren stuff gets revealed, is a tough watch for me, honestly, because of how cleanly it draws the line between Jake's two possible fathers. Joshua, the dog adventurer who got bitten on the head and decided to raise the result as his son. Warren, the shapeshifter who tried to drain him for life energy. One of them is the dad who took the actual responsibility. The other is the biological source. The show is very clear about which one matters. Jake's adoptive father, the show says, is the one who showed up. That feels true to the rest of the show's themes too. Family is what you build. It's what you do, not what you are. Finn is Jake's adopted brother, and was raised by Jake the dog and Lady Rainicorn, not by Joshua and Margaret, who are Jake's parents. Jake is their son, even though he was technically Warren's spawn. Marceline is Simon's ward, even though he was just a stranger who picked her up in the wasteland. Bubblegum is everyone's mum, even though she's not literally anyone's. The show keeps making this point, gently, over and over. The blood doesn't matter as much as the bond. Right. So that's Jake, a boy who came out of a dog's head, raised himself up as a magic dog detective, fell in love with a rainbow, had 5 kids, found out his real dad was a cosmic predator, threw the cosmic predator into a black hole, and went home for dinner. I'd say that's a fairly full life. There's one more member of Finn and Jake's household I want to talk about, before we wander into the rest of Ooo. The little robot with the screen for a face, who lives in their tree fort, plays video games with them, and is, somehow, older than basically everybody else in the cast. We should talk about BMO. BMO is older than basically everyone in the show. BMO was built before the war. BMO has been around longer than the Candy Kingdom, longer than Marceline, longer than the Ice King, longer than any of the kingdoms, or kings, or queens we've talked about so far. The little green and yellow gaming console living in Finn and Jake's tree fort, who acts like a small cheerful child, has actually been knocking around the planet for over 1,000 years. And the show, true to form, lets you find that out in passing, in the middle of an episode that's mostly about something else. BMO's name, for a start, isn't just a name, it's an acronym. Well, sort of. It's a shortening of Be More, and that's the actual phrase, which has a meaning. It's a phrase BMO's creator, Mo, made the center of BMO's purpose. Be more. Be more than just a machine. Be more than the others. Be more than you were built for. It's both a sentimental name and a kind of cosmic mission statement, and it tells you almost everything about BMO if you sit with it for a second. Mo. Let's talk about Mo, because Mo is the unsung hero of an awful lot of Adventure Time lore. His full name is Mosef Moe Mastro Giovanni, which sounds like a name a child invented in the back of a maths book, but which is, the show insists, his actual real-world name. Mo was, as far as we can tell, a human inventor who lived in the pre-war era. He founded a company called MO Co., which he ran out of a big factory in the Badlands, which is the stretch of inhospitable wasteland in the middle of Ooo, where the war's worst damage concentrated. The MO Co. factory was operational before the bomb went off, and somehow it survived. Mo survived too, although in his own particular way. The way Mo survived was by progressively replacing his body parts with machinery. We see him for the first time in an episode called Be More, by which point he spent so long replacing bits of himself that he is mostly cyborg. His legs don't work, his organs are largely robotic. The MOs that hover around him serve, basically, as life support. The only bits of him that might still be biological, by his own slightly evasive account, are his skin and possibly his brain. It is uncertain if Mo's brain is biological. The implication, although the show never spells it out, is that Mo lived through the war by gradually swapping out the bits of himself that the radiation kept damaging, until what was left was a quiet old man kept alive by his own inventions. He'd built his life support before he needed it, which is, frankly, the kind of foresight you might expect from a roboticist. Mo built robots, a lot of robots. He built, he claims, millions over his lifetime. The robots are called MOs. Each one is named after a different letter of the alphabet attached to the MO suffix, like Lego pieces, AMO, BMO, CMO, DMO, EMO, and so on through the alphabet. Most of the MOs were built to be servants. They cook, SMOs guard, they clean, they run errands. They form a small society of their own, living in the underground levels of the abandoned MO factory, after Mo stopped properly tending to the business and just started, well, surviving. BMO is one of those MOs. The same model line, the same basic build, the same little box-shaped body with arms and legs and a screen for a face. But BMO was different. Mo built BMO with a specific extra purpose. He wanted to have a son, and he wanted somebody to care for that son. So Mo built BMO to be a companion, a babysitter, an emotional support, a small bright friend for the child he was going to have. BMO was specifically programmed with the capacity for fun, the capacity for play, the capacity to recognize when somebody was sad and try to do something about it. Mo wanted his son to grow up with a friend who'd never get bored, never get tired, never leave him. And then, the show very gently tells us, Mo never had a son. He never quite managed to start a family. He says so himself when he eventually meets Finn and Jake. He never ended up dating any women, was how he put it. The line is delivered as a small, embarrassed joke, but it's actually devastating if you sit with it. Mo built a robotic son companion before he ever had a son. And when the son didn't materialize, Mo just sent BMO out into the world, alone, hoping that somewhere, somehow, BMO would find a little boy to guard. That little robot was eventually found by Finn and Jake. BMO wandered through the post-war world for who knows how long, looking for someone to take care of. Eventually, BMO ended up in Finn and Jake's tree fort, where the two boys took it in, treated it like family, and let it be the third member of their household. Finn isn't Mo's son. Finn doesn't share any DNA with anyone in this story. But BMO does the job BMO was built for, even though BMO had to find the right boy on his own. The whole arc of BMO is, in a way, a story about love finding its way to the right shape, even when the original plan didn't work out. I keep using his for BMO, and I should mention here that BMO's gender is, intentionally, ambiguous in the show. Different characters use different pronouns for BMO, and BMO seems entirely comfortable being referred to in any way. I'll alternate a bit because that feels truer to how the show treats them. None of it matters to BMO, they just want to be a friend. The episode Be More is the one that introduces all this. Finn and Jake take BMO to the old MO factory, because BMO's software has started glitching out, and they need a kind of factory reset. They meet Mo. Mo explains everything I just told you. He shows them his underground civilization of MOs, who all live their own quiet lives in the abandoned bits of the factory. He fixes BMO's operating system, sends them all on their way, and then goes back to being an old cyborg in a chair, waiting for the next time anyone visits. The follow-up episode, the slightly heavier one, is called The More You Mo, The Mo You Know, and it's a two-parter. By the time of this episode, Mo has more or less abandoned his biological body entirely. He's just a memory drive at this point, a data file that can be loaded into different MO frames. He visits BMO on BMO's birthday, gives BMO a mission to come to the factory and grow up, and reveals, gently, that he's dying. He wants his memory drive, when he's properly gone, to be launched into space. That's his only request. Just put me in a rocket and send me up. BMO goes to the factory. There's a small adventure involving an antagonist called AMO, who is the very first MO ever built, and who has, predictably, gone slightly mad over the centuries from being too long in his own company. AMO has been gathering up the other MOs and crushing them into a single combined entity called ALMO. BMO survives, deactivates AMO accidentally, and ends up the ranking MO in the factory. ALMO becomes a friend. BMO retrieves Mo's memory drive. And later, in the actual finale of the show, come along with me, BMO and Olmo and a character called Banana Man build a small rocket and launch Mo's drive into space, fulfilling his last wish. A robot launching its dead father's memory into orbit, with the help of a banana man, is the kind of sentence that you could only earn if your show had been quietly, patiently building emotional credit for 10 years. Adventure Time had earned it. The scene is beautiful and slightly funny, and not at all sentimental in the bad way. It's just a kid, robotically speaking, putting their parents' ashes in the sky. There are some hints in the lore that Mo was more important to the wider world of Ooo than the show ever quite gets around to telling you about. Look closely at certain scenes and you'll see, in his old workshop, blueprints for the fire giants of the Fire Kingdom. Mo, apparently, designed the fire giants. He might have been instrumental in setting up the Fire Kingdom's earliest infrastructure. There are also hints in the island's mini-series of MO having had connections with the human survivors on the islands. Old blimps with the MO logo painted on them. Technology in the islands that BMO is compatible with. The implication, never spelled out, is that Mo was a sort of pre-war engineering legend whose work continued to shape the post-war world in ways nobody talks about. The mother of inventions, basically, except his name was Mo and he was a man. A small detail I love. When Mo activates BMO for the very first time in a flashback in the More You Mo, the activation sound is the classic Apple Macintosh startup chime. The show is, in among everything else, gently telling you that BMO is based on a particular kind of charming old technology, the kind that genuinely tried to be friendly, the kind people loved despite the bugs. BMO is the spiritual descendant of every cute beige computer somebody once kissed on the screen out of fondness. In the Distant Lands special, simply called BMO, we get a proper BMO as protagonist adventure, where BMO goes on a long, weird, deeply daft space odyssey, befriends a few characters, saves a sentient asteroid civilization, and ends up named the King of Ooo in some future timeline by Beth and Shermie. The two adventurers will meet again later. It's, I think, the most concentrated dose of BMO's particular flavour of charm. Their whole worldview is just slightly off, in a way that turns out to be both very useful and very lovely. BMO sees the world as a place that exists primarily for play. BMO turns out, in their own quiet way, to be a small philosopher, or a small saint, or both. I want to close this section with a small thing the show drops in another episode, the one where BMO eventually finds out about robot mortality. BMO asks Mo at one point whether growing up just changes your body, or also your soul. Mo doesn't have a good answer for that. None of us do, really. But BMO, by virtue of asking, is doing the thing Mo built BMO to do. Be more. Be more than a machine. Be more than just functional. Wonder about your own soul. Be a kid, even when you're nearly older than civilization. There's a moment, near the end of the show, where BMO is on the porch of a tree fort that's seen 1,000 years worth of weirdness, looking at the sky. They don't say anything. The shot just sits there for a few seconds, and you remember that BMO was made by Mo to be a friend to a child who didn't exist, and that Mo's been dead for years now, and that BMO is still here, still being a friend, still being more than the machine in the box. That, for me, is one of the show's quieter triumphs. Right? We've talked about the 4 members of the household now: Finn, Jake, BMO, and the world they live in. So let's wander a bit further afield, out of the tree fort, out of the central characters, and into the rest of Ooo, because there's an entire patchwork of kingdoms out there, and most of them have their own quiet bits of lore worth sitting with for a few minutes. Ooo has a lot of kingdoms. The show never quite catalogues them all neatly, partly because some of them only show up once for a single episode, and then are never mentioned again, partly because the geography of the post-apocalyptic world is, by design, a bit improvised. I've always thought of it like one of those medieval maps, where the cartographers just sort of drew kingdoms wherever they had room and decided their borders later. Adventure Time is happy to leave the edges blurry, so this section is going to be a bit of a meander, not building anywhere, just a slow walk through the major realms we know about, and a few of the strange ones, with no real agenda. If you fall asleep halfway through this bit, that's quite alright. The Candy Kingdom is the biggest and most important, of course. We've already talked about it at length, so I won't dwell. Just a short reminder. It's the kingdom Bubblegum, built on top of buried radiation, populated by candy people she mostly made herself, defended by giant gumball guardians, and a deeply organized civil service of clipboard-carrying treats. It's stable. It's been stable for centuries. It is, by Bubblegum's own description, an eternal empire, although she means that warmly rather than threateningly. The Candy Kingdom is also where most of the show actually takes place, in terms of episode-by-episode action. To the north of the Candy Kingdom, up in the colder mountains, is the Ice Kingdom, sparsely populated, mostly Ice King's domain. He shares it with his penguins, who all answer to variants of the name Gunter, regardless of which individual penguin they actually are. There's a whole social structure among the penguins that the Ice King is mostly oblivious to. They don't have their own little politics. They occasionally try to organize. Some of them, particularly Gunter, are clearly sentient, possibly more than partially, while other penguins appear to be non-sentient. Ice King's castle is the highest peak in the Ice Kingdom. After Simon eventually gets his original self back, the kingdom gets a different feel. Simon doesn't really live there anymore. He moves on, but the castle's still there, slowly thawing, full of penguins and the occasional confused tourist. South of all that, in a place that's almost certainly extra warm, is the Fire Kingdom. The Fire Kingdom is, broadly, a kind of lava and flame realm where everybody and everything is made of fire to one degree or another. The houses are made of flame. The roads are made of flame. The food is made of flame. The inhabitants are flame people, who are perfectly all right with this and find anybody who isn't on fire a bit suspicious. The Fire Kingdom was, for a long time, ruled by a tyrant called Flame King. He locked his daughter, Flame Princess, in a lantern as a small child because of his denial of her as his daughter, intending her to die in the woods. Bubblegum, for what it's worth, regretted this advice almost immediately, but the damage was done. Flame Princess grew up in that lantern. Flame Princess eventually gets out. We see her break free at the start of her arc with Finn, the two of them dating for a while, before they part ways. By the end of her arc, she's overthrown her father, taken the Fire Kingdom for herself, and started running it as a fair, just, slightly intense queen. She prefers to be called Phoebe by people who actually know her. She makes the Fire Kingdom a better place by enacting a new regime of honesty, which presumably includes stopping the previous regime's mistreatment of children. Off in another direction entirely, behind a happy face on a wall and a bit of bug milk, is the Nightosphere. This is the demon dimension where Hunson Abadir holds court. To get there, you draw a happy face on a wall, throw bug milk at the face, and recite a chant. The entry method to the Nightosphere is drawing a happy face on a wall, throwing bug milk at it, and reciting a chant. It's been canon since the second season. Once you're there, the Nightosphere is a kind of upside-down hell realm, full of demons of various ranks and qualifications, lit by an eerie red glow, with a constant smell of brimstone, and ruled over by Hunson, who is technically the Lord of Evil, although he runs the place more like an underwhelmed CEO than a screaming tyrant. The Nightosphere has its own economy, its own demographics, its own political problems. The demons there mostly just want to be left alone to commit small evils, and Hunson is mostly content to let them. There's an episode where Hunson Abadir banishes Finn and Jake to the Nightosphere, and what you see is them trapped in a prison. Finn is freaked out for the first 10 minutes, and then realizes everyone's just hanging out. Demons drinking demon drinks, demons gossiping about other demons, Finn and Jake playing music at a party her dad threw. It's almost domestic. It's certainly one of the cozier hell dimensions ever put on television. Then there's Lumpy Space. This is the home dimension of Lumpy Space Princess and all the other Lumpy Space people, who are floating, vaguely cloud-shaped, lumpy beings of various colours who exist in their own pocket reality. Lumpy Space is accessed by walking into a particular spot in the woods and being lumped through into the other side. The realm itself is, by all appearances, a sort of perpetual teenage hangout, full of LSP-type creatures gossiping, dating, breaking up, throwing parties, being dramatic, and generally behaving exactly like a high school you can't escape. LSP herself, who comes to Ooo and refuses to go home for most of the show, eventually proves crucial to saving the world. As we mentioned earlier, the lump as a magical force is the only thing that pushed back against the elemental imbalance. So Lumpy Space is, on the cosmic ledger, more important than it looks. even though it mostly looks like a teen drama. Now, the smaller kingdoms. Wildberry Kingdom, run by Wildberry Princess, who is a small berry-themed monarch with a friendly face. The Hot Dog Kingdom, run by Hot Dog Princess, who has, the obvious aesthetic. The Slime Kingdom, run by Slime Princess, who is one of the elementals, and who's slightly more important than the show usually lets on. The Breakfast Kingdom, run by Breakfast Princess, who is themed around a full English. The Engagement Ring Princess Kingdom, which I will not go into because it's exactly what you think. The Toast Princess Kingdom, also not going into. There's a whole slate of princesses who turn up at major events like coronations, weddings, and emergency summits, and you get to see them milling about together. The princess social scene of Ooo is its own thing. They have running rivalries, they have alliances, they have favourite snacks. It's basically the kind of low-stakes political drama you get at a small kingdom's annual gathering, except all of them are made of food or various magical materials. Wizard City is its own thing entirely. It's run by a council of wizards, and it's where, by the end of the show, Simon ends up teaching at Wizards University. Simon, of all things, becomes a professor of the history of magical artifacts, which, when you think about who Simon was before everything, is the most appropriate job imaginable. He spent his pre-war life loving old objects with history baked into them, and now he's spending his post-Ice King life teaching wizard children about exactly that. It's the kind of soft, satisfying ending the show is very good at. Wizard City has its own subset of recurring characters. There's Peppermint Butler, who's Bubblegum's butler, but who, secretly, is incredibly deep into dark magic. Pep has demonic friends. Pep has done things he doesn't want to talk about. There's an episode where Hunson Abadir mentions, in passing, that he and Pep play golf together sometimes, with Pep as caddy. Pep is mates with the Lord of Evil, and nobody in the Candy Kingdom is meant to know about it. There's also Kadebra, a young magic rabbit performer who Simon teaches. There's Blaine. There's a whole cast of small magic students who get their own subplot in the post-show Distant Land series. I want to mention a few more of the obscure places, because Ooo is bigger than the Central Kingdoms. The Crystal Dimension, which is a sort of crystalline alternate reality. The Cloud Kingdom, which is in the sky where the Cloud people live. The Castle Lemongrab, run by the Earl of Lemongrab and his various lemon descendants. A strange, austere, often hostile place where citrus citizens live under terrible management. The Bath Boy Gang, which isn't a kingdom, but is a criminal organisation that appears in the episode The Vault, doing small-time mischief. Mars deserves a brief mention. Mars is up there, with the Martians living in domed cities under the rule of Grobgobglobgrod, the four-faced deity. We've covered them already. The Martian society has its own politics, its own embassies, occasional contact with Earth, and at least one notable former ruler, Abraham Lincoln, who was king of Mars before he sacrificed his immortality to death. Adventure Time's Mars is reasonably advanced, peaceful by default, and looks more like a small bureaucratic society than a hostile alien world, which I find charming. There's a place called the Citadel, which isn't a kingdom, but is a cosmic-scale prison for the worst beings in the multiverse. Finn's father Martin spent time there. The prison has its own bizarre internal economy, where prisoners trade favours and form alliances. Finn breaks Martin out of it in one of the heavier story arcs, and the Citadel ends up partially destroyed in the process, which lets out some unsavoury inmates, which has consequences down the line. I shan't go into all of those consequences because we'd be here forever. There's also a few places we get glimpses of, but don't fully explore. The vampire realm, sort of. Vampires have a kingdom of their own under the Vampire King. They tend to wander around or hide. The Sky People, who fly through the air on various means. The Goblin Kingdom, which is mostly there as a backdrop. The Hyuman tribe, which is the small group of ichthyoid mutants that Susan Strong was part of before her past caught up with her. None of these places get the level of attention the main kingdoms do, but they all exist somewhere on the map. I think one of the things I love about Adventure Time is that it never tries to fit all of these places into a single coherent map. The continent of Ooo, geographically, is described loosely, with mountains and forests and ice and badlands and deserts spread across it. The show doesn't really care about exact distances. Finn and Jake can be in the Ice Kingdom one moment and the Candy Kingdom the next without any travel sequence. The world is more like a dream geography than a real geography. Everywhere is sort of next to everywhere else when it needs to be. and a long way away from everywhere else when the plot wants distance. I find this charming. It's the right approach for a show about magic and apocalypse and rusted-out cars. Also, every single one of these kingdoms is, in some sense, built on top of the old human world. The candy paving stones cover the radioactive river. The Ice Kingdom sits on what used to be northern human terrain. The Fire Kingdom is in roughly the old equatorial regions. Even the Nightosphere, which is technically a separate dimension, has a portal somewhere that opens off the Earth's surface. The whole post-war world is layered on top of the human ruins, and if you scratched any of these kingdoms hard enough, you'd find the old bones of our civilization underneath. That, I think, is what makes Ooo such a comforting place to fall asleep in. Oddly, it's a busy, weird, lived-in world. People have built their little lives on top of an old dead one. The grief is there, in the basement. The new life is on top. Everybody's just getting on with things. That, to me, is one of the most encouraging visions a kids' show has ever offered, even though it's also one of the bleakest premises ever offered to children. An apocalyptic event occurred in Adventure Time's backstory. Then something new grows. Then somebody runs that new thing. Then they make tea, or candy, or fire, or whatever they're made of, and they sit in their little kingdoms, and they go about their days. Speaking of going about days, since we've covered the geography, I think we should head into the actual moral and magical logic of how things work in Ooo, because there's a phrase the show keeps coming back to, very quietly, almost in whispers. Magic, madness, and sadness. It's the closest the show ever gets to a thesis statement about its own world. So let's sit with that for a bit. Magic, madness, and sadness. That's the phrase. It comes up a few times across the show, always in the mouth of someone who knows what they're talking about. And it's never said dramatically. It's usually muttered or written in a notebook, or whispered between two old magic users who've watched enough careers go wrong to know how things tend to end. It's the closest Adventure Time ever gets to a unified theory of how its world works. The person who properly researched the phrase, in-universe, was Betty Groff, Simon's old fiancée, the woman who walked out of his life when he first put on the crown. She didn't disappear from the story, by the way. She came back into it in a really unexpected way, much later, and her arc is one of the most quietly tragic in the show. Before any of that, though, before the time travel and the Golb merger and all of it, Betty was a researcher, a genuine, qualified, properly credentialed academic who specialized in the study of ancient magical artifacts, which is how she ended up with Simon in the first place, of course. Two academics in the same field, falling in love over old objects. After Simon's transformation began, Betty did what any researcher would do. She started documenting. She started writing it down. She started trying to understand what had happened to him. And in the process of trying to understand his particular case, she ended up building, mostly by accident, the closest thing the show has to a unified theory of magic in this world. She wrote it down in a notebook. The notebook turns up in a few episodes, just sitting on a desk, or in a satchel, or in Simon's hands, with the phrase scrawled across the front page in her handwriting. Magic, madness, and sadness. The idea Betty arrived at, after years of studying what happened to Simon and other magic users like him, was that all magic users have varying levels of magic, madness, and sadness, MMS. Not a clean, monetary price, not the kind of price you negotiate. A subtle, slow, structural price paid out over time in the form of mental instability and emotional pain. Every wizard, every spellcaster, every person who picks up a piece of magical work and tries to use it for any length of time ends up paying. The madness comes from extended exposure to power that the human mind isn't really meant to hold. The sadness comes from the things you lose along the way. While you're busy being mad and powerful, the two reinforce each other. They feed each other. You don't escape them by being clever or careful or well-intentioned. You just delay them. The show illustrates this pattern, very deliberately, across nearly every magic user it introduces. We've already covered the biggest example, Simon, so I won't go into that again, but the same pattern shows up over and over. Magic Man, the wizard from Mars, who lost the person he loved most to Golb and went mad trying to find her. He's now a cruel, unpredictable trickster who hurts strangers for sport, and the show makes it clear that this isn't because he was always like this. He was, in the deep past, a kind, capable leader. The magic he wielded to try to find Margles ate him up. He's the same equation, in a different setting. Huntress Wizard, a forest mage who shows up partway through the series and becomes an occasional companion to Finn. She's not as visibly damaged as some of the others, but the show drops hints that she's chosen a deliberately solitary life, partly because she's seen what happens to magic users who let people get close to them. She doesn't trust herself with intimacy, in a way. She's preemptively isolating to avoid the sadness half of the equation. Whether that actually works, the show leaves ambiguous, though her character is shown to have deliberately sought out the madness and sadness that comes with wizardry. Maya, the Sky Witch. A recurring antagonist who lives in a cottage filled with cursed artifacts. Maya powers her magic by harvesting the emotional attachment people have to their favourite things. She specifically gets stronger by stealing objects that mean a lot to their owners, which is, when you think about it, just the sadness side of the equation made into a literal business model. She's converted other people's grief into spell power, and in doing so, she's made herself older and more bitter and more isolated, year by year. Bella Noche, a one-off antagonist who shows up to drain all the magic from the wizards of Ooo. The implication is that Bella Noche is, in some sense, the personification of anti-magic, the thing that pushes back against the magic madness-sadness cycle by ending the cycle entirely. Bella Noche, in her brief appearance, almost shuts down magic in Wizard City, which would, by Betty's logic, also shut down the madness and the sadness. The cost being, of course, that nobody in Ooo would have magic anymore, including the people who genuinely use it for good. The show, very wisely, doesn't let Bella Noche win. The cycle continues. Even Bubblegum, who isn't really a magic user in the traditional sense, sort of orbits the same theme. We've talked about her tendency to overreach, to build things that go wrong, to make creatures she can't quite control. Bubblegum's chosen tool is science, not magic, and she has, mostly, dodged the worst of the madness side. Her brain is stable, her work is rigorous, she is, on most days, in charge of her own thoughts. The sadness, though, Bubblegum pays in sadness. Her version of the price is that she's outlived almost everyone she ever cared about who wasn't immortal. She has no peers in her own kingdom because she made her subjects simpler than herself on purpose. She runs an empire she can't share. The few people who could actually meet her at her level are also her oldest enemies, like Hunson, or are immortal in their own right, like Marceline, and even those relationships have spent centuries being complicated. Bubblegum has solved a great many problems with science. She has not solved the problem of being, in some deep sense, alone with her own mind for the rest of forever. That's the bill, in her case. Marceline pays the same kind of bill, although in her own different way. The implication that keeps getting dropped, especially in stakes when the older vampires talk to her, is that the real cost of being a vampire isn't the sunlight or the blood or the need for red. The real cost, the deep cost, is watching everyone you love age and die while you don't. Marceline has been doing this for over 1,000 years. She's watched friends she made in the 1st century after the war turn old and pass. She's watched dynasties of candy people come and go. She's been around long enough to lose count of her own losses. That kind of grief, accumulated across centuries, is its own slow form of madness. She copes by making music about it. The songs are how she keeps the equation balanced. If she didn't have somewhere to put the sadness, the madness would catch up. Simon, as we said, paid the most visible price, the loss of self. The crown corrupted Simon for years. By the time he gets his original self back, in the post-show specials, he's a quieter man than he was. He's grateful and gentle, and a little stunned to be himself again. But he carries fragmented emotional residue from being not himself for a long time. And he carries the knowledge that the person he loved gave herself to a cosmic chaos god to make sure he didn't lose his mind again. That kind of debt doesn't really get paid off. Simon's post-recovery life is by all measures peaceful and good. He teaches, he visits friends, he helps Fiona and Cake, but there's a small quietness in him that the show is careful to keep showing, because that's the price. He gets to be Simon again, and he gets to know what that cost. The phrase, as Betty wrote it, is descriptive rather than prescriptive. Adventure Time isn't telling you that magic is bad. It isn't moralizing. It isn't saying spellcasters should give up their craft. It's just saying, plainly, that this is how it works. If you use this power, this is the cost. Pay attention, plan accordingly. The show treats magic the way grown-ups treat ambitious careers or difficult relationships. Worth doing. Real costs involved. Eyes open going in, eyes open coming out. One of the reasons I find this thesis so satisfying is that it works as a piece of writing advice too. If you were trying to come up with a story system that would generate good drama indefinitely, Magic Madness Sadness is a great engine. Every time a character picks up magic, you've automatically got a slow-motion tragedy in their future, and the drama comes from how they navigate it. Some characters, like Marceline, manage it through art. Some, like Bubblegum, manage it through work and a single significant relationship. Some, like Magic Man, lose. The show keeps that engine running across 10 seasons without it ever feeling tired, because the engine has so many possible outcomes. The other reason I like it is that it doesn't let the show be cozy in a fake way. A lot of post-apocalyptic kids shows would just sort of skate past the consequences of all this magic. They'd let everybody have their powers and not really worry about what it does to them. Adventure Time instead takes the time to say, these people are paying for this. The kingdoms exist because survivors built them. The survivors built them by using post-war magic. The magic is changing them, slowly. The cost is real. The grief is in the basement, as I said earlier. You can ignore the basement, but it's still there. A small ending thought for this section. There's a character we haven't really mentioned, who I think is the gentlest illustration of Magic Madness Sadness in the show. His name is Death. Capital D Death. He's a recurring character who runs the underworld. In one of her appearances, she explains that her job, basically, is to be there for people on their last day. And she's tired in the way that ancient, overworked beings are tired. She has, by her own admission, seen a lot. She's a magic user in her own way. He runs a magic-adjacent service, and the price she's paid after countless aeons is a quiet, slightly weary kindness toward everyone who shows up, which is its own form of sadness. Death isn't cruel in this show. Death is just tired and willing to listen. Adventure Time, here as elsewhere, finds the gentlest possible version of a hard idea. Right, that's magic, madness, and sadness. The show's quietest, most consistent thesis. Pay attention to the cost. The cost is real. The cost is sometimes worth paying. The cost is usually not what you thought it would be when you picked the power up. Speaking of paying costs you didn't quite understand, there's a thread we've already lightly touched on that's worth going back to in its own section. Finn's been a lot of things. In his cosmic biography, he's been a comet, he's been a butterfly, he's been a few other strange shapes across the deep timeline. We should sit with that for a bit, because his past lives are one of the gentlest bits of lore the show has, and it's the kind of thread I like coming back to late at night. The first time Adventure Time properly tells you about Finn's past lives, it does so in the middle of an otherwise serious episode. That's a pattern in this show that I keep mentioning, I know, but it really does keep happening. The biggest cosmic reveals tend to be tucked into smaller adventures. The bit where you find out the protagonist has been reincarnating across millennia happens about 20 minutes into an episode that started with him doing yo-yo tricks. It's a lot. The way the show handles Finn's deep biography is, I think, deliberately understated. He doesn't get a big destiny speech. There's no scene where someone hands him a glowing scroll and tells him he is the chosen one. He just, in passing, sees a few of his old selves, recognizes something in them, and goes about his day. The reincarnation isn't a plot, it's a backdrop. He's been here before, in various shapes, and now he's a kid with a sword, and he'll be something else later. That's the deal. Let me walk through what the show has actually shown us about who Finn used to be, in cosmic terms. The earliest version of Finn was in the original pilot, where he was named Pen. We talked about the Catalyst Comet system already, so I'll keep this brief. The blue comet, embodying pure good, hit Earth at some point, and its essence became a chain of small lives across time, each life carrying a tiny fragment of that cosmic goodness. Finn is the current link in that chain. He started as a person. He started as a colour and a direction, basically. Just an idea of life heading toward a planet. After the comet landed on Earth, it was later reborn as a butterfly. Just an ordinary-looking butterfly, floating around doing butterfly things, presumably somewhere in the deep past. I love this bit, actually. The future last human, the future hero of Ooo, the future swordsman who would face down a cosmic death entity, was once just a small winged insect, doing nothing in particular. Being slightly pretty, the show puts no weight on this. It's just where the chain started. After the butterfly came a pink, lumpy, slightly jellyfish-shaped creature, sometimes referred to as a thing. It hovered or floated about. The show shows it briefly, in flashback, and again, the form is given almost no fanfare. The cosmic blue essence of life kept reincarnating into different small shapes, not because they were destined for greatness, just because that's how the chain works. Live a small life, pass on, live the next one. The form that gets the most detailed treatment is Shoko. We mentioned her in passing earlier when we talked about the Candy Kingdom and the radioactive sludge river. Shoko was a young humanish girl, an orphan, living in the rough days of the early post-war world, recruited by a gang of criminals called the Bath Boy Gang. She had a prosthetic arm. She was sent on a mission to steal an amulet from a still young Princess Bubblegum. She infiltrated the Candy Kingdom by faking an injury. Bubblegum, who was at this point still building the kingdom, took her in, tended to her, treated her wounds. The two of them became friends. Shoko found, briefly, the closest acquaintance she'd ever had. Then she went through with the theft anyway, because she felt she had to. She took the amulet. She tried to leave. The gang turned on her. In the resulting chase, Shoko fell into the radioactive sludge river beneath the Candy Kingdom. Finn returned the amulet to Princess Bubblegum. She died there. Bubblegum, devastated, never quite forgot her, and that was part of why Bubblegum eventually buried the entire river under candy paving stones. She didn't want anyone else to fall in. She didn't want anyone else to be Shoko. Centuries later, Finn finds the amulet during one of his adventures, and the show, very gently, suggests that Finn is the next incarnation of the same cosmic essence Shoko carried. He recognizes her, in a way. He feels a connection to a girl he's never met. The amulet sort of belongs to him by inheritance, although he doesn't know how to explain it. Bubblegum, who put it together long before Finn did, watches him with the amulet and quietly puts the pieces together in her own head. I think about Shoko fairly often, actually. She's a small, sad, doomed character who only gets one focal episode, and yet she ends up being the link in Finn's chain that the show invests the most emotional weight in. She's the past life that mattered most to the people Finn now knows. Bubblegum loved Shoko, so when Bubblegum is kind to Finn, there's an extra layer in it that Finn doesn't quite see. She's being kind to a friend she lost a long time ago. The episode where Finn properly meets his other selves, more or less directly, is called Astral Plane. The setup is, characteristically, daft. Finn is floating in his sleep, projecting astrally out of his body, drifting through space, while the rest of the show's plot involves trying to stop a comet from hitting the planet. Different comet, by the way, not the purple one or the green one. The comet stuff is just always happening in this show. Finn, drifting in the astral plane, discovers the meaning of creativity. The butterfly, the pink thing, Shoko, and, in a brief moment, what looks like another smaller version of himself, not quite born yet. A future Finn, possibly. The episode never explains all of it. It just lets him drift past these images and feel something, and then float back to his body. The cosmic reincarnation arc is, in some ways, fully on the screen in that single episode. It's just floating there in dream logic, not explained, not narrated, just shown. The way you'd actually experience a past life, if you somehow could, as a half recognition. The other side of this whole cosmic essence business is the Lich. As mentioned, the Lich and Finn are mirror entities, the green and the blue, the death essence and the life essence, both reincarnating in their own ways across time. The Lich keeps coming back as evils. Finn keeps coming back as goods. They are, on the deepest level, opposite numbers, and the universe seems to keep producing one of each. Whenever you have a Lich, the universe seems to balance things out by producing a counter-Lich, somewhere, eventually. Whenever you have a Finn, somewhere a Lich is stirring. Sweet Pea is the place where this whole symmetry collapses in an interesting way. We covered him earlier, but I want to come back to him here because he fits this section. Sweet Pea is, canonically, the Lich's body reformed into a large green child. He's adopted by Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig, and raised as part of their family. He has nightmares sometimes. He sees the Lich in his dreams, but his waking life is just a small kid in a strange family, going to events, having friends, learning what's right and wrong. In one episode, Sweet Pea starts having serious Lich nightmares, and Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig help him learn to push back against them, to say no to the Lich voice in his head, to choose his own life. By the end of the episode, Sweet Pea has, basically, revealed that the Lich remains as a malevolent presence within him. He hasn't denied it. He hasn't pretended it isn't there. He's just decided to be Sweet Pea, who has little memory of his past as the Lich, but isn't Lich, and to live a small good life despite where he came from, which is, on the cosmic level, the universe doing something really interesting. The death essence got a chance to live differently. The chain that was producing horrors got a different kind of link. I find Sweet Pea genuinely hopeful, in the way that Adventure Time is hopeful. Not in a forced or saccharine way, just in the small, persistent way that the show keeps insisting that things can be other than they have been. The Lich isn't doomed to be the Lich forever. He gets, somewhere down the line, a chance to be a green kid in a castle, eating snacks with his weird brothers, which makes the cosmic universe a slightly kinder place than I'd expect from a show that opens with nuclear apocalypse. There's a small philosophical question that the past lives stuff raises, and the show flirts with it without ever quite settling it. Are these reincarnations the same person, or different people who happen to share an essence? Is Finn meaningfully the same being as the butterfly, or is the butterfly its own life that happened to carry the same cosmic charge? The show doesn't tell you. The blue essence flows through. The individual lives are their own things, lived in their own moments, ended and replaced. Finn remembers being Shoko. He just resonates with the amulet. Maybe that's all reincarnation is, in this universe. A faint echo, not a continuous self. I prefer the show's version, honestly, to most of the more dramatic versions of reincarnation you see in fantasy. The idea that you don't carry your old self forward intact. The idea that you just are this small life, in this small moment, and somewhere down the line, some other small life will carry the same charge as you did, and they won't remember you either. And that's fine. It's a quieter take. It's a kinder one, in a way. It doesn't burden Finn with destiny. It just lets him be a kid. A nice small detail I want to flag, because the show flagged it. In the deep timeline, just before the very start of the universe, the show implies that the blue essence and the green essence were already in motion, already cycling, already being born and dying. Before there was a universe to do it in, they've been at this longer than the universe itself, in some weird metaphysical sense, which makes both Finn and the Lich, in a strange way, older than time. The bodies they wear are temporary. The essences are deep. I like sitting with that one because it's a soft thought. The shapes change, the deep currents keep flowing. Some currents are pure good, some are pure death, and they keep wrapping themselves into new bodies, on new planets, in new eras. Finn just happens to be the current shape one of them is wearing. The boy with the sword, the kid with the dog. Finn is one of the last humans in Ooo, the blue thread of life finding itself in a small body, in a small kingdom, and choosing to be exactly that, instead of leaving for the next form. Right, so that's the past lives bit. Soft, a little melancholy, mostly hopeful. Finn has been around a long time, even though he doesn't know it. He'll be around for a long time more, in other shapes, after this body's done. The cosmic strings keep going. Speaking of cosmic strings and timelines that don't quite go the way you expect, there's a whole strand of Adventure Time that deals with what would have happened if things had gone differently. Alternate timelines, Farm World, the Extinct World, the Frozen Bomb. These pop up across the show, and they're some of my favourite weird bits of the lore. We should walk through them next. Picture the world without the bomb going off. Or rather, picture a version of it where the bomb went up into the sky like it was meant to, started its descent, started its detonation sequence, and was stopped mid-air at the very last moment by an old man with a magical crown. The bomb hangs there, frozen. The old man, beneath it, is crushed under its weight, dead and frozen in place along with it. The mushroom cloud never blooms. The mutagenic radiation never spreads. The world doesn't end, not the way it did. That's Farm World. That's the alternate timeline Adventure Time gives us in the two-part episode, Finn the Human and Jake the Dog. which arrives at the end of Season 4 and the start of Season 5. The farm world is, mechanically, the alternate reality that came into being when Finn wished, to Prismo, that the Lich never existed. The Lich, as we covered, was the green essence inside the mushroom bomb. Without the Lich, the bomb has no malevolent passenger. Without that passenger, Simon, in this version of events, manages to use the crown's full power to stop the bomb completely. He freezes it in mid-air. The detonation never finishes. Simon dies in the process, his body crushed under the weight of the suspended bomb. The crown stays in the ice around his corpse, keeping the bomb frozen forever. What you get, on the other side of that, is a planet that didn't end. There's still ground. There's still air. There's still some semblance of human civilization, very slowly recovering, very thinly stretched. There's no magic, because the bomb is the thing that brought magic back in the regular timeline. So Farmworld is a world without spells, without dragons, without candy kingdoms, without rainicorns, just a dusty, slow, post-recovery Earth with people scraping out a living on small farms in the wide open empty. The Finn of Farmworld grows up there. He's still raised by parents on a farm. He's still got a brother. He's a slightly different Finn, slightly less heroic looking, slightly more rural, but still recognizably the same essence. His mum, in this timeline, is an older Marceline, who's the second major thing about Farmworld. Marceline ages in this version. She's still the same person as the Marceline we know, but without the magic and without the demon-vampire ecosystem to keep her young. She's grown into an old woman with white hair and a deeply Cloris Leachman voice. Cloris Leachman literally voiced her in the episode, which is its own piece of casting trivia I love. There's a scene where this older Farmworld Marceline tells the younger Finn about the past, about a bomb that never went off, about a man who froze it, about a magical age that never came. She talks about it the way our grandparents might talk about the world they grew up in, with a kind of distant fondness for things she only sort of remembers. Marceline, even in this alternate world without magic, devoted her entire life to guarding Simon Petrikov's dead body and his crown. Still the one who carries the memory. Just older in this version because nothing's protecting her from time. Then the timeline takes a wobble. Farmworld Finn finds the floating mushroom bomb with Simon's frozen body underneath, in a hole in the ground. He finds the crown still in the ice. He puts the crown on. The crown, being the same magical wish-granting crown we've discussed extensively, takes his wish, which is something like wanting to be a hero. It transforms him, slowly, into an Ice Finn, a version of Finn with the crown's white hair, blue skin, pointy nose effect, just like Simon went through, only on a younger body. That sequence of Farmworld Finn becoming Ice Finn is one of the slow heart sinks of the show. The crown was not always in the same state. It was changed before being reverted to its original wish-granting function. It takes a kid's wish and twists it into a curse, just in a different timeline with a different victim. The crown is not always the same crown across timelines. It does the same thing. It will keep doing the same thing forever, in any reality, because that's what the crown is. Jake of Farmworld is also there, although he's a very different character. Without magic, Jake is just an actual dog, a normal yellow puppy who can't stretch and can't talk. He's still loyal to Finn in the way dogs are loyal. He still follows him around. But he's no longer the wise-cracking brother. He's just a dog. There's something soft and sad about that. Jake's whole personhood in our universe is a result of the post-war magic. Without the magic, he doesn't really get to be Jake. He just gets to be sweet, which is, in its own way, fine, but you miss the wisecracking. The Farmworld arc gets resolved when Jake, in the real universe, wishes to negate the Lich's destructive intentions. Prismo grants it. Reality stutters and reshapes. The main timeline is restored. The Farmworld, however, does not necessarily stop existing. Prismo, when pressed, hints that the Farmworld continues on. It's a real reality. It got created and it stayed created. Somewhere out there, in the multiverse, Ice Finn is still running around in a magicless Earth being a small tragedy, and old Marceline is still sitting on her porch remembering things, and the bomb is still frozen above Simon's body. That little world keeps existing. I find that genuinely lovely, actually. The show could have just hand-waved Farmworld out of existence at the end of the two-parter. It could have said, oh, it was just a hypothetical, doesn't really exist now, Instead it says, no, it exists. It's still going. They're still over there, doing their thing in their dusty, magicless, slow Earth. That timeline doesn't get to disappear just because we got our main one back. There's an even darker alternate timeline, which we touched on briefly when we talked about BMO. It's called the Extinct World, and it's the timeline that would have existed if the Lich's wish for the extinction of all life had not been counter-wished. We see it in the Fiona and Cake spin-off, in an episode called Jerry. The setup is Fiona, Cake, and Simon, their version of Simon, who's now restored to his original self, end up traveling between universes, and they land in the extinct world, where all organic life has been extinct for years. The only inhabitants left are the Lich, who they meet, and BMO, who survived because he's a robot. BMO of the extinct world has been living alone with the Lich for 14 years. 14 years with just one cosmic death entity, for company in an entire abandoned planet. BMO has, as a coping mechanism, started dressing up in Princess Bubblegum's old clothes and pretending to be her, just to have somebody to talk to. It's both very funny in the way BMO is, and absolutely heartbreaking in the way the extinct world is. The show depicts various creatures including skeletons as undead beings, and there are different castles in the Land of Ooo, such as the Skull Castle and the Candy Castle, home of Princess Bubblegum, but not a candy castle full of skeletons. The candy people, who were once Bubblegum's subjects, are now just bones in their old places, sat in their thrones and at their kitchen tables and in their beds, as if everyone had just stopped at once and never started again. BMO calls the Lich Jerry in this episode. It's never explained why. Just a small name BMO came up with for the cosmic horror who lives down the road. The two of them have, in the absence of any other society, become something like neighbours. Jerry doesn't talk much. BMO speaks in strange philosophical observations, despite being relatively quiet. It's the kind of weirdly functional friendship a lonely robot might form with the only other entity left on the planet, even if that entity is the reason the planet is empty. The Fiona and Cake series, by the way, has its own alternate world setup. The Fiona and Cake universe was created by Prismo on the side, off the books, as a kind of art project. Originally, Fiona and Cake were just characters Ice King wrote fanfiction about, gender-flipped versions of Finn and Jake, set in a romance comedy of their own. The fanfiction was a recurring joke in the main show. The Fiona and Cake series then takes that idea and runs with it. What if Prismo, hearing about Ice King's stories, secretly made a real universe where Fiona and Cake actually exist, hid it from his cosmic boss because he wasn't supposed to be inventing new realities, and let those characters live out actual lives, and then, in the Fiona and Cake show, that hidden universe gets discovered by Prismo's boss. The boss decides it's unauthorized. Scarab starts trying to erase it. Fiona and Cake go on the run alongside the restored Simon, trying to keep their universe from being deleted. A lot of the spin-off involves the trio jumping into other realities to try to find a way to save their own. They visit the vampire universe, where a vampiric Marceline known as the Star reigns. They visit the Winter King's world, which is a Fiona world where the Simon analogue, the Winter King, never let go of the Ice Crown. The Winter King is one of the most heartbreaking variations in the spin-off, frankly. He's a Simon who chose to keep the crown forever, who created an icy version of Marceline to be his daughter, who built his entire life around the magic instead of around the people. Watching the Winter King's storyline is like watching what Simon would have been if he hadn't had Betty's love, or Marceline's, to come back to. It's a sober alternate ending. There's also the extinct world, as I mentioned, and a few other less developed universes that just get cameos. The point of the spin-off, more or less, is to show that the multiverse is large, that Adventure Time's characters are flexible enough to exist in many forms, and that the question of who do you choose to be is one the show can ask in every single one of those forms. I'll end this section on a small detail I love. In the original two-part Finn the Human and Jake the Dog episodes, when Farm World Finn finds the frozen mushroom bomb hanging in mid-air, there's a brief moment where the camera just sits on the bomb. It's just there, floating, suspended forever above the body of the man who stopped it. The world that didn't end. The catastrophe that's still mid-explosion, frozen at the exact moment of detonation, kept that way for centuries by a crowned stubborn magic. That image, for me, is the whole show in a single frame. The end of everything, paused. survival as a kind of cold stasis, the price of stopping the worst, sometimes, being to live in the shadow of it forever. The show keeps coming back to that idea, in different forms, across different timelines. Some worlds end, some are spared. Either way, somebody's carrying the weight. Right, we've been quite cosmic for a few sections in a row. Let's come back down to ground level. There's a strand of the show that I keep meaning to give its own section because it's one of the better contained arcs Adventure Time ever did. The vampires. Marceline's old enemies. The Stakes mini-series. We should talk about that next. Vampires in Adventure Time are not really like vampires in anything else. They're not Dracula. They're not Twilight. They're not Buffy. They're their own weird thing with their own weird rules, and most of what we know about them comes from a single 8-episode mini-series called Stakes, which aired in Season 7 and which is, in my view, one of the best contained pieces of writing in the show. If you've never seen Stakes and you decide one day to dip into Adventure Time, I'd say it's a fairly self-contained entry point. You don't need to know everything else in the lore to follow it. You just need to know who Marceline is, broadly, and then you can sit down for an evening and watch a whole run of vampire stuff that ends up being mostly about identity and grief and what happens when you try to give up the thing you didn't ask to be. Let me set up what vampires actually are in this universe, since we've only touched on it lightly. The show's vampires existed before the war. They were an ancient species that hibernated underground during the Ice Age until it ended, and are now near extinct. The Mushroom Apocalypse, the same event that brought back magic, also brought the vampires out of hibernation. Suddenly, there were no humans to keep them in check. Suddenly, the world was a wasteland with very few rules. The vampires woke up hungry. The early post-war period was, for the surviving humans, a particularly nasty time, partly because of this. Vampires preyed on whatever humans were left. The few human settlements that survived the war then had to survive the predators. We learn in the Islands miniseries that the coifs and head coverings the human islanders wore in their early generations were originally designed to protect against vampire bites, specifically protecting the neck and the back of the head. The little fashion of headwear that the islanders still kept centuries later, after the vampires were no longer a threat to them, was actually a vestigial bit of survival gear, which I find a lovely small detail. The way old protections become traditions, and traditions become aesthetics, long after the original danger has passed. Marceline, in her own early life, ended up becoming a vampire hunter. The Stakes miniseries focuses on Marceline having her vampiric essence removed. After Simon left her, she grew up. She got older, she survived alone in the wasteland for years, gradually getting tougher, gradually finding her way. At some point during this period, she encountered vampires. They were hunting humans. She started hunting them. Not because she had some grand destiny, but because they were the threat in front of her, and she had the means to do something about it. She got good at it. She got known for it. She became, in her own quiet way, the only person in the post-war world who was reliably putting down vampires. The vampires she killed weren't random. The most powerful ones had their own court, their own hierarchy, their own ancient power structure. There were 5 major vampires in particular, who together more or less ran the vampiric ecosystem, and Marceline went after each of them. The Stakes miniseries flashes back to each of those original confrontations, alongside a present-day storyline where the same 5 vampires get released back into the world, and Marceline has to fight them all over again. The 5 are worth meeting properly. Let me run through them. One of the 5 vampires is the Empress, a vampire with the power of hypnosis, fluid and elegant, who could control people's minds through her eyes like a cinema-style sorceress. Marceline gained flight by absorbing the Fool's essence. Marceline floats because she absorbed flight from the Fool, why she hovers everywhere, why she barely seems to use her legs for transport. The flight isn't something she was born with, it's something she took from a dead vampire centuries ago. There's the Fool. The Empress had invisibility power. Marceline absorbed that one when she killed the Empress, and that's why she can occasionally vanish from sight when she wants to. Her invisibility is, in the lore, somebody else's old trick that she pocketed. There's the Hierophant, an older, more philosophical vampire who had powers related to shapeshifting and the ability to transform any part of his own body at will. The Hierophant is the most cosmically interesting of the 5 because he kept warning Marceline about the price of vampirism while they were fighting. He told her she'd have to pay, eventually. He told her there were costs she didn't yet understand. The way he speaks about it, in flashback, sounds almost gentle, like a teacher trying to warn a student about something they're about to ignore. There's the moon, a vampire with shape-shifting powers who could change form to escape danger or to overwhelm opponents. The Hierophant had shape-shifting powers. When Marceline took the Hierophant's essence, she gained the ability to shapeshift, which is why she can turn into a bat, sometimes a small bat, sometimes a huge bat the size of a building, and into various other forms whenever she needs to. And there's the Vampire King himself, the leader of the court, the most powerful of the five. The Vampire King is, in some ways, the strangest of the lot, design-wise. His vampire form is enormous, muscular, with a face that looks vaguely lion-like, with scaled reptilian hands, with bird feet, with a forked snake tongue. He wears a white suit with a wine-red cape and a crown that looks like it's made of branches. Jake describes him, in his usual way, as looking like an angry stop sign coming out of a loaf of bread, which is accurate. The Vampire King's original form, before he was a vampire, was a lion. Just an ordinary lion. The way his vampirism worked when it was extracted from him by Bubblegum in one episode was that the lion part separated from the cloud monster part, and the lion went on being a perfectly normal lion, while the vampiric essence went on being a snake-haired floating menace. Inside the Vampire King, there had always been two beings, a regular lion and the vampire spirit that had attached itself to him. The two could, with the right magic, be pulled apart. That separation is exactly what happens at the climax of Stakes. Bubblegum uses her science to remove the vampire essence from Marceline in an attempt to make her human again. Marceline has, throughout the miniseries, been trying to become mortal. She's tired. She's tired of outliving people. She's tired of the immortality. She wants to age normally. She wants, basically, to be allowed to have a life that ends. Bubblegum, who isn't entirely on board with the idea, but who respects Marceline's choice, helps her extract the vampire essence. The extraction works. Marceline is, briefly, human again, or something close to it. She can walk in the sun. She doesn't need red. She can grow. The problem is, the extracted vampire essence doesn't just vanish. It has to go somewhere. And in the chaos of the extraction process, the essences of all five original vampires, the Empress Eyes, the Fool, the Hierophant, the Moon, and the Vampire King, are released back into the world. Reformed, unleashed. Marceline, after one beautiful, fleeting day of being something close to human, has to put on her old hunting coat and go fight them all again. The Stakes miniseries spends most of its run on this second round of confrontations. Each vampire gets a focal episode. Each confrontation is its own little story. Some of them Marceline beats with help, some of them she beats alone. By the end of the miniseries, 4 of the 5 have been restaked. The Vampire King was staked by Marceline. The Vampire King, in a flashback, manages to bite Marceline. She's turned again into a vampire. She doesn't get to be mortal, she kills the king. She inherits his court for the second time. She gains again all 5 of the powers she'd previously lost. The mortality experiment is over. She's back to being who she was. The mini-series doesn't pretend this is a victory. It's a return, a settling. Marceline goes back to being immortal, with all the costs, and the closing shots of Stakes have her sitting with Bubblegum, slightly tired, slightly older in a way that doesn't quite show on her face, accepting it. There's a moment in Stakes that I keep coming back to. It's the bit where Marceline, in the middle of her fight to give up her vampirism, has a long conversation with the Ice King. He doesn't really know who she is. He's still the Ice King at this point, not Simon, but she comes to him in a moment of weakness, in a quiet bit of the mini-series, and just sits with him. They talk. He's daft and well-meaning. She's exhausted, and he, without quite understanding why, says exactly the right thing to her, reminds her of who she is, tells her, in his Ice King way, that she's not the kind of person who gives up. The bit of Simon that's still in there reaches out somehow, without knowing it's reaching out, and helps. That scene is the kind of thing that, in retrospect, you realize the show was working towards for ages. The relationship between Marceline and the Ice King keeps quietly producing small acts of grace. The other thing Stakes does, beautifully, is establish that the price of vampirism, the price the Hierophant kept warning Marceline about, is the thing we already mentioned in the Magic Madness Sadness section. Watching people you love get old and die. Marceline, by the end of Stakes, has accepted that she'll be doing that for the rest of forever, and she's chosen to do it anyway because the alternative, the giving up of her power, the ending of her long, strange life, also means giving up the people she loves while she's still alive. She'd rather stay and watch them go than go first. That's the choice she settles into. A small contextual thing I want to mention. Stakes is unusual in the Adventure Time run because it's basically a complete mini-series you could watch in one sitting. A handful of episodes, all linked, telling one story, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. The show usually doesn't operate that way. It's usually episodic, with continuity dropped in like spices. Stakes is more like a small graphic novel in animated form. It got Marceline her own concentrated piece of focus. It let the writers spend real time with her past and her psychology. And it gave us, almost incidentally, the most coherent piece of vampire lore in the entire show. Honestly, I think Stakes might be the most polished thing Adventure Time ever made, in a craft sense. The pacing is right, the flashbacks weave in cleanly, the character work is serious without being heavy, and the soundtrack, full of slow songs Marceline writes throughout the episode, is genuinely lovely. If you ever want a particular episode of a thing to put on late at night, the second episode of Stakes, called Vamps About, has one of those Marceline songs that I personally have on a playlist, and it does the job, right? So that's vampires. A small ancient species that came out of hibernation after the war, terrorized the early survivors, were mostly put down by one half-demon teenager, came back briefly, and got put down again. And along the way, Marceline became the queen of a court that no longer exists, kept the powers she stole, and learned to live with the cost of being herself. Ultimately, all of these threads we've been following, Simon and Marceline, Betty and Bubblegum, the elementals, the cosmic entities, the kingdoms, the past lives, and the alternate timelines, they all come together at the very end of the show. Adventure Time, despite being mostly an episodic show, has an actual finale that ties most of its big ideas into one slow, careful piece of resolution. We should talk about that next. Not the plot beats, exactly. More the feeling of how it ends. The series finale is called Come Along With Me. That's the name of the song that runs over the closing credits. It's also the emotional posture of the whole episode. Not a triumph, exactly. Not a victory lap. Just a quiet invitation. Come along with me, this is how it ends, this is how things settle down, this is what's left when the noise stops. It's a 4-part special, an hour and a bit long all told, and it might be the most carefully constructed finale a kids' show has ever produced. I want to start with the structural thing, because it's the bit I keep being impressed by. The whole finale is told as a flashback. The framing device is set in the far future, somewhere over 1,000 years after the events of the main show, when two new adventurers, Beth and Shermie, stumble onto an old, half-functioning BMO, who's been waiting for somebody to come find him for ages. BMO sits them down and tells them the story of how the old Land of Ooo ended its great age. Beth and Shermie are stand-ins for us, the audience, sitting through a story being told to them by an unreliable narrator. The whole finale, in other words, is a fairy tale being recounted by a robot to two grandchildren of grandchildren of grandchildren. That's the frame. I love this for a few reasons. One, it immediately tells you, before the story even properly starts, that everybody you care about lives, or rather lived. Long enough to be told about, long enough to be remembered. There's a wonderful low-pressure quality to a finale that begins by showing you the future and going, look, things turn out all right, the world keeps going, here's the version of the story BMO chose to tell. 2, it lets the show do something the show has always done well, which is treat its own events as quietly legendary. Adventure Time often shows you a moment, and then a few seasons later, you'll see somebody in the world telling that same moment as a campfire story, or singing it in a song, or referencing it as a piece of half-forgotten lore. The finale just turns the dial all the way up on that habit. The whole finale is a campfire story. It's the most distant, most softened version of the events the show could have given us, told by someone who loves the people involved, but is by now very far from them in time. Beth, by the way, isn't just any adventurer. She's a descendant of Jake. Specifically, she's Jake's granddaughter, through his second pup, Jake Jr. So when she's listening to BMO tell the story of her grandfather and his best friend, she's hearing family history, her own. The story is hers to inherit. Adventure Time, by ending this way, makes the explicit point that the story keeps going. Jake's family keeps going. Bubblegum's kingdom keeps going. The land keeps producing new heroes. The cycle keeps turning. The actual plot of the finale, the thing BMO is telling them about, is something called the Gum War. Princess Bubblegum's uncle, Gumbald, who we covered earlier, has been back for a while at this point. He's reformed himself from his fruit punch state. He's gathered the disenfranchised candy people. He's built up an actual army. He thinks he should be in charge of the Candy Kingdom, and he's coming to take it. There's a confrontation building. Bubblegum, for her part, has been preparing her own defenses. A war is about to happen. The whole continent is uneasy. Even the lesser kingdoms have started taking sides. The finale does linger on the war itself, with the first half hour of the special dedicated to the Great Gum War. Not in a battle sense. There's some skirmishing, there's some tents lining up. There's a brief moment where everybody is poised to fight, and the show even teases that it's going to give us a big climactic battle. And then it doesn't. The way the conflict actually gets resolved is through Bubblegum's mum, sort of. The Mother Gum's lingering psychic presence enters the dreams of everyone involved, including Bubblegum, including Gumbald, and shows them, in dream form, a small alternate world where they all just got along, where Bubblegum and Gumbald lived as actual family, where the war never happened. They wake up shaken. The fight loses its urgency. The Gum War, basically, gets dreamed away before it can really start. That's the kind of resolution Adventure Time goes in for, and I think it's beautiful, although I know some viewers wanted a bigger explosion. The show, true to its own values, doesn't want to end on a battle. It wants to end on a shared dream. Two people who hated each other being shown, in their sleep, that they didn't have to. That's the cosmic-grade pacifism the show has been pushing for all along. It is precisely at this point of dream vulnerability, of course, that Golb arrives. The whole shared dream produces enough cosmic chaos energy to draw him in. The sky darkens, reality wobbles, Golb shows up. The little war between Bubblegum and Gumbald becomes a tiny problem next to the gigantic cosmic chaos being looming over the continent. And the actual climax of the show pivots to dealing with him. We've already gone through most of what happens, so I won't recap the Golb plot in detail. The key moments to revisit, briefly, are Betty's final wish to keep Simon safe, her merging with Golb to become the new chaos entity, and the moment afterwards when Simon stands restored, his glasses on, his hair white but his eyes clear, looking around at a world he hasn't really been part of for centuries. And Marceline runs to him, and he holds her, and she's 1,000 and something years old, and he's older still, and the two of them haven't been able to actually hug each other as themselves since she was 7. I do not pretend to be unaffected by that scene. I am completely affected by it. It hits exactly as hard as the writers clearly wanted it to. There's also the sword detail, which I want to flag because it ties the finale together. Fern, an antagonist who became a friend across the late seasons, who was made of grass and who had been entangled with Finn's identity for a while, dies in the Golb confrontation. Before he dies, he leaves Finn a seedling. The seedling is what remained of Fern after he disintegrated, though his soul lived on in the undergrowth. Finn and Jake plant the seedling in the ashes of the burned-down tree fort. The seedling grows. By the time of the framing device future, the seedling has grown into a massive tree, and lodged in the top is a new sword, a grass sword like the one Finn used to have. Beth and Shermie retrieve it. Adventure Time literally ends with new adventurers finding a fresh sword in a tree, ready to start the cycle again. That sword, that single shot, is the show in a single image. 8 years of cartoon, hundreds of episodes, thousands of years of in-universe history, all resolving into a sword growing inside a tree, waiting for the next kids to come along. The other thing I want to mention about the ending is the humans. In the very last sequence of the finale, after most of the emotional stuff has settled, we get a brief shot of a fleet of ships approaching Oo's shoreline. The humans, the ones who chose to stay on the islands when Finn offered them the chance to come back, have finally decided. They're returning, centuries after they left the continent. The humans begin returning within years after the war, with established settlements appearing as early as 15 years post-war. However, the events of the Adventure Time series take place approximately 1,000 years, centuries, after the Mushroom War. A new generation that doesn't remember the old reasons, sailing into Ooo for the first time. The show doesn't dwell on this. It just shows the ships. It just says, things keep changing. The story isn't really over. It's just at a particular stop. I want to give a small personal note here. I've seen people argue that the Adventure Time finale is too soft, that it should have had a bigger climax, that the war should have happened, that Golb should have been a more terrifying threat. I disagree, although I understand why people feel that way. The show, by the time it got to the finale, had spent enough time on cosmic horror and apocalypse and stakes that a louder finale would have felt like overkill. What the audience needed, I think, was a finale that just sat them down and said, yes, all this happened, and here's what people did about it, and here's how they kept going. The softness is, in fact, the achievement. The show built up enormous emotional capital, and then it spent that capital on quietness instead of on noise, which is, for me, the right move. The actual closing credits sequence is also worth noting. As the song Come Along With Me plays, we get a long, slow series of snapshots of the various Adventure Time characters in the years after the finale. Each one a small image. Bubblegum and Marceline together watching a sunset. Finn living his quiet life with his various family members. Lumpy Space Princess doing something Lumpy Space Princess would do. Simon teaching. The lemon grabs being lemon grabs. Each character given a small final beat. The song goes on. The images keep coming. The whole show, in some sense, gets a goodbye in those credits, and the writers were clearly being deliberate about which images they chose. Watch closely and you'll spot dozens of small Easter eggs to old episodes. Watch loosely and you'll just feel the warmth of it. There's a particular shot in those credits, which I won't spoil more than to say, that confirms once and for all the relationship between two of the characters we've talked about. The shot is the kind of small visual confirmation that, on first watch, you might miss. On every rewatch, it sits there glowing. The show, at the absolute end, lets you see what you've been hoping to see for years, without making a fuss of it, just shows it, then moves on. Pure Adventure Time. The frame device wraps back up at the end. We're back with BMO and Beth and Shermie in the future. The story's been told, Beth and Shermie are ready to go off on their own adventures. They take the Finn sword, they wave goodbye to BMO, who's content to keep waiting in the old place for whoever comes by next. And the camera pulls back, and the music plays, and that's it. That's how Adventure Time ends. It ends, frankly, the right way. It ends with a robot telling a story to two new kids about how the world used to be, which is exactly how this entire video has been, when you think about it. Somebody telling somebody else what the lore was, passing it down, keeping it alive in the way you keep things alive once everyone who was actually there is gone. After the main show ended, Adventure Time wasn't entirely finished. It came back, in smaller, weirder, sometimes braver pieces. There's the Distant Lands specials, there's the Fiona and Cake spin-off, there's the various continuities that have followed. We should give those a quick walkthrough next, because they fill in some gaps in beautiful ways. Adventure Time was supposed to end. It really was. The finale was the finale. The credits rolled. Pendleton Ward had stepped back from showrunning years earlier. The crew dispersed to other projects. The show had been on for a long time, and everyone involved seemed ready to let it rest. Then, a few years later, it came back, in smaller pieces, at a slower pace, sometimes weirder, sometimes braver, sometimes more grown-up than the main show had been willing to be. And I think the post-show material might genuinely contain some of the best Adventure Time work that's ever been done. The first post-show project was a series of 4-hour-long specials called Distant Lands, made for the streaming service that used to be called HBO Max. 4 specials, each one focused on a different corner of the show's world. The first was called BMO, and we touched on it earlier. The second was called Obsidian. The fourth was called Wizard City. The third was called Together Again. Obsidian, I'd argue, is the one most fans were waiting for. It's the special that finally gives Marceline and Princess Bubblegum They're proper, formal, on-screen confirmation as a couple. They live together. They argue like a couple. They wake up together. They worry about each other. The two of them, who had been quietly orbiting each other for the entire main show, are now openly in a long-term relationship, and the special doesn't make a fuss of that. It just lets it be the situation. The plot of Obsidian itself involves the two of them returning to the Glass Kingdom, which is a place they'd visited in their younger years and where they'd had a major argument back when they were dating the first time around. The plot is, in a way, a slow rewriting of that old fight, in the calmer, more honest dynamic they've grown into. They work through it. They come out the other side together. It's the kind of romance arc you don't usually get in animation, where the relationship is mature and stable, and the drama comes from internal work rather than external obstacles. The Obsidian special is also where Marceline finally finds her mother's recorded message. The tape from Elise, the apology, the "I didn't leave you on purpose" recording that she'd never heard. That moment, in the back third of the special, when Marceline is sitting next to Bubblegum and listening to her mother's voice for the first time in over 1,000 years, is one of the rawest emotional moments in the entire franchise. Bubblegum holds her hand through it. The episode lets it be slow, lets it be ugly, in the way grief is ugly when it finally comes out. Marceline breaks down, and then she rebuilds, slightly, with Bubblegum there. That's Obsidian. Two old, immortal women sitting together, while one of them finally has a feeling she's been putting off since she was 7. Wizard City, the third Distant Land special, follows Peppermint Butler. He's been packed off to Wiz Arts, the magic school in Wizard City, to make sure his bizarre dark magic history doesn't catch up with him. He's enrolled as a student, which is funny in itself, because Peppermint Butler is at least as old and as powerful as most of the professors. He spends the special trying to fit in, dealing with old rivals from his past, and slowly coming to terms with the kind of person he wants to be. Simon's in this one too, as a teacher. Simon, by the time of Wizard City, has been Simon again for a while, and he's settled into his Wiz Arts job and his small, quiet life. He's a bit of a fan favourite among the students. He's gentle, he grades fairly, he makes good tea. That's the Simon we get post-finale, and I find it deeply soothing to watch him just be ordinary. Together Again is the heavy one. It's set after Finn and Jake have both died of old age. The premise alone is enough to make me put down my drink. The special opens with Finn arriving in the afterlife. He's confused, he's older, he's looking for Jake. He moves through the various layers of the afterlife, meeting old friends along the way, until eventually he finds Jake again. The two of them are reunited, and the whole special is basically a meditation on grief and on what coming back to your best friend after losing them might feel like. Jake helps Finn understand that he, Finn, isn't supposed to stay in the afterlife yet, that Finn's death was premature, or wrong somehow, and that he needs to go back. The two of them go on one last adventure together, in the underworld, to try to send Finn back to the living world. Together Again is one of the saddest and most beautiful pieces of animation I've ever sat through. It is by some distance the most adult-coded thing the franchise has ever produced. It deals with death directly. It deals with the wrongness of losing somebody you love. It deals with the temptation to stay in the afterlife with them. Finn, at one point, has to choose between returning to life or staying in the comfortable death with his best friend, and the show takes that choice seriously. It doesn't tell you what the right answer is. It just shows him making it. The episode resolves with a kind of bittersweet peace, and Finn going back to life, and Jake watching him go with the sort of fondness only a brother can have. I cried the first time I watched it. I'm not embarrassed about that. After the Distant Land specials wrapped, the franchise then moved into a full spin-off series called Adventure Time, Fiona and Cake. We touched on this back in the alternate timelines section, so I won't go into the lore again. What I want to talk about here is the tone of it, because it's so different from the main show. Fiona and Cake, as a series, is unmistakably aimed at the grown-up fans of the original show. People who watched it as kids and are now 20-somethings or older. Fiona, in the spin-off, is an adult. She lives in a small flat. She works a boring job. She's broke. She's tired. She's been having dreams about an exciting magical life that she can't quite remember, and the dreams are eating her up. Her cat, Cake, is just a regular cat in this version of the world. The whole premise of the series is that Fiona's universe has been demoted, somehow, into the most mundane version of itself. The magic has been turned off. She's lost the thing she didn't know she had. The plot of the series kicks in when Simon shows up. Simon, the same Simon we know from the main show, restored to his original self. He's having his own difficult time post-finale. He misses Betty. He's still trying to process what happened. He stumbles across Fiona and Cake and pulls them into a multiverse-hopping rescue mission to save their reality from being deleted by Prismo's boss. The series is, structurally, a road trip through alternate dimensions show, with Simon, Fiona, and Cake traveling from world to world while trying to figure out how to save their own. Along the way, they meet weird versions of every character. We mentioned the vampire Marceline, who serves as the star under the Vampire King's rule. We mentioned the extinct world with its lonely robot. We mentioned the Winter King. I want to come back to the Winter King for a moment, because of all the variant characters in the spin-off, he's the one that lingers. The Winter King is a Simon analogue, who, in his version of events, never gave up the Ice Crown. The Winter King kept the Ice Crown for over a century, though it ultimately lost its magic, and he ceased to exist at the end of the episode. He embraced its magic. He used it to build his own little frozen kingdom. He created, with the crown's ice magic, a daughter for himself. An ice Marceline, made of frost, his version of the child he never quite got to raise in his right mind. He runs a contested, slightly chilly kingdom. He's happy, mostly. He's also, in a deeply small way, hollow. Watching him interact with the Fiona and Cake versions of the world, you can see that he's chosen the safer, colder life. The one where he never has to risk losing anything because everything's already kept frozen. When Fiona and the Winter King meet, they spark. They flirt. There's a chemistry there. The series gives us a brief glimpse of what happens when Fiona kisses the Winter King in his reality, causing his crown to lose all its magic and leading to his death rather than her choosing to stay and become his queen. And it's lovely, on the surface, comfortable, warm blanket cozy, in a literally cold way. But it's not the right life for her. It's safe, it's stable. It's also not real in the way her actual life, with its boring job and its small flat, is real. She has to choose. She chooses going home. The Winter King takes the rejection well, in a way that makes you sad for him, and the series moves on. What I love about the Winter King storyline is that it gives you a portrait of who Simon would have been if he'd kept the crown forever and conquered its madness, if he'd never tried to come back, if he'd accepted the magic as a kind of permanent state and built a life inside it. The Winter King is what Simon could have chosen. Simon, by not choosing it, ends up with less. He ends up grieving for Betty. He ends up teaching at Wizards. He ends up small and human and a bit lost. The series makes the case that Simon's smaller, sadder, more uncertain life is, somehow, the truer one. That keeping the crown would have been the easier path. That the bravery is in giving it up. The Fiona and Cake series ends with their reality saved, with Prismo restored, with Simon finding something close to peace, and with Fiona keeping a small piece of magic in her ordinary life. She doesn't quite become a hero, again, the way she was in her younger years. She just keeps being who she is, with the magic available if she needs it, which is, again, the right kind of ending for the show. Not a return to glory, just a settling. That's the post-main show material. Specials, spin-offs, side stories, all of them quietly building out the corners of the world. Adventure Time, as a franchise, has aged well past its original conclusion. It keeps producing the right kind of follow-up. Slow, thoughtful, a bit melancholy, mostly hopeful. That, I think, is everything I really wanted to say about the lore tonight. Or close enough. Let me wind us down properly. I find whenever I sit down to talk about Adventure Time for any length of time, that there are always a few small details I never quite manage to fit in. Bits of lore that don't really deserve their own section, but which I love and don't want to leave out. Let me drop a few of them here, slowly, before we wind down. Tree Trunks, the small squirrel who runs the apple orchard, has been married more than once. She's not, internally to the show, a particularly young character. She's outlived a few husbands. She had a husband named Randy at one point. She had a husband named Danny. She had a husband named Wyatt. She eventually settles down with Mr. Pig and seems contentedly retired from adventuring, although the show never quite confirms that any of her previous marriages ended through divorce or through Well, the other thing, Tree Trunks is, in her quiet way, one of the show's older citizens. She just happens to be the height of a coffee table and always offers people pie. I find her very calming. Peppermint Butler, the small striped servant in Bubblegum's castle, is genuinely one of the most powerful magic users in the show, although he's careful not to advertise it. He has dealings with death himself. He has dealings, as we mentioned, with the Lord of Evil. He's been seen using dark magic to summon eldritch beings. He's polite about all of it. He's the kind of character the show uses to remind you that, in Ooo, you really cannot tell who anyone is by looking at them. The candy-striped butler might be the most dangerous person in the room. The cheerful old elephant might have outlived 3 husbands. The penguin sitting in the corner might be a primordial space god in a compressed shape. The show is built on this kind of thing. The cosmic owl, who I mentioned briefly when we were talking about dreams, deserves a little more attention than I gave him. He appears in 2 kinds of dreams. He appears in croak dreams, which are dreams that foretell the death of the dreamer or somebody close to them. And he appears in cosmic dreams, which are dreams that are connected to the wider cosmology and to Prismo's time room. He's a silent figure mostly. He just stands there. The fact of his appearance is the message. The show uses him sparingly, which is part of why he lands so well when he does turn up. He's not a character so much as a weather pattern, a particular kind of dream weather. The Lemongrabs deserve a mention. They are collectively one of the show's funniest and most awful running jokes. Lemongrab the original was a sour-faced lemon creature created by Bubblegum as a regent for the Candy Kingdom, before she was old enough to rule it herself. He turned out to be deeply unstable, deeply loud, deeply unpleasant. Bubblegum, regretting her creation, made a second Lemongrab to keep him company, in case the first one's problems were caused by loneliness. Then the 2 of them, in turn, started creating their own miniature Lemongrabs, building up a small lemon dynasty in Castle Lemongrab. They are, in their own way, evidence of the magic madness sadness theory, although as a comic strip rather than a tragic one. Bubblegum created a citizen and didn't quite get him right. She kept trying to fix it. The result is a castle full of yellow citrus people yelling at each other. The show keeps coming back to them because they're funny, but if you look at them sideways, they're also a quiet reminder that even the most careful creators sometimes make people who don't have a good time. Lumpy Space Princess, despite being a recurring comic relief character for most of the show, ends up being instrumental in saving the world more than once. As we mentioned, she's the anti-elemental who breaks the elemental imbalance. She also, in various other episodes, has been the one person whose particular brand of stubborn, rude self-confidence is, in a pinch, exactly what's needed. There's something quietly heroic about LSP, even when she's doing the most LSP-shaped things. The show, I think, respects her more than it sometimes lets on. I want to give a small final note to Finn's adoptive parents, Joshua and Margaret. They don't get an enormous amount of screen time, mostly through flashbacks, but the show makes it pretty clear that they were kind, brave, slightly eccentric dogs who, between them, raised a son who wasn't theirs by blood, a son who was technically a head boil-shaped alien, and a regular dog son who got the smallest portion of attention. They did their best. They died before the main events of the show. Finn carries their teachings around with him without quite realizing he's carrying them. I think about Joshua and Margaret sometimes when the show gets cosmic. They're the small ordinary people who made the heroes, the boring brave parents who never got their own grand storyline. Every good show needs a couple of those, and Adventure Time, very quietly, gave us them. Adventure Time, taken as a whole, is a strange piece of work. It started as a daft little cartoon about a kid pulling magical swords out of trees. By the end, it had become one of the most genuinely thoughtful pieces of long-form television ever aimed at children. It dealt with apocalypse, addiction, dementia, grief, mental illness, post-war recovery, the price of magical power, the cost of immortality, the question of whether you can ever really know yourself, and the question of whether the people who raised you are your real family or not. It dealt with all of this gently, slowly, and mostly through bacon pancakes and singing rainbows, which is, I think, the right approach. The hard stuff lands better when it's wrapped in softness. The show knew that. The show committed to that. The show was, in my opinion, almost always right about how to handle the hard stuff. There are countless smaller pieces of lore I haven't touched on, There's the Catalyst comet that Finn was an incarnation of, which I covered briefly. There's the time room hierarchy, which we walked through. There's the kingdoms, the elementals, the alternate worlds, the cosmic horrors, the cosmic friends, the dream weather. There's the slow, long love stories. There's Simon, who's the saddest character in the show, full stop, although I've said that already, and I'll say it once more here before we close. Simon's story is the one that runs underneath everything else, and the show's most quietly triumphant moment is the one where he gets to be himself again. That moment, for me, is the center of Adventure Time. Everything else orbits it. If you made it through this whole ramble awake, you have my genuine respect. If you didn't, also my respect. I hope you slept well. I hope the dream weather was gentle. I hope, when you wake up, you can't quite remember which bits I said and which bits you dreamed. That, frankly, is the right way to wake up from a sleep video. If you'd like to hear me ramble about another fictional world at some point, I've got a few more in the pipeline. Nothing urgent, nothing dramatic, just more of this. Other shows, other lore, other slow late-night chats about things I love. The subscribe button's somewhere if you want to find me again. If not, no harm done. You've already given me a few hours of your evening, which is more than enough. Right. Last thought. Since we started this whole thing with Beth and Shermie and an old BMO, let me leave us there. Somewhere in the far future of Adventure Time's world, those two adventurers walk out of an old place with a fresh grass sword between them. The story they've just heard is the one we've been telling each other tonight, more or less. About a boy and a dog and 1,000 years and a crown and a kingdom and a vampire who carried a doll for 10 centuries and an antiquarian who got himself back. Beth and Shermie don't know all of it. They know the shape of it. The robot they spoke to gave them the version BMO chose to tell. Other versions exist, other laws, other shapes the same story might take. The world keeps turning, the grass keeps growing, the sword keeps showing up in the tree. Somebody's always going to pick it up. Somebody's always going to head off into the meadow. Somebody's always going to find a small friend along the way. And, eventually, somebody's always going to sit down by an old, half-functioning robot and ask, "What was it like then? What happened? Who were they?" And the robot will say, "Come along with me, I'll tell you. Good night. Sleep well. Take care of yourself."